Westboro Select Board meeting called here on Tuesday, July 19th, 2022, being 6 o'clock. I will convene the meeting. I would ask that all those that are able to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We do have a busy agenda tonight, so I will get us moving right away. So the first thing on our agenda is open forum. I didn't have anybody approach me, but is there anybody here for open forum? Yes. Michael.
Thank you, Ian.
Yep.
Michael Beretti, 54 Adams Street. I'm standing member of the Advisory Finance Committee. I just wanted to let you know that I think we on the committee, and I personally am very pleased to see the issue of tax classification. As you may know, our committee over the last few months, in fact prior to last fall's town meeting, began looking at a series of projects that we might want, or issues that we might get more deeply involved in. And after looking at 7 or 8, we landed on taxes. Surprise, surprise. But I guess what I'm hoping is that tonight's presentation, and I'm looking forward to both John and Leah's presentation, is a very strong public program to educate our taxpayers on taxes in general, the classification process, so that at least we'll knock down some of the numbers of questions that we get about why are we getting taxed the way we're taxed. So I'm looking forward to this. I will tell you that the committee stands ready, and we will do our part as well. We'll continue to go down that road, and we're looking forward to the outcome over the next few months. So thank you very much for taking this on.
Thank you very much. Anything else? Anybody else for open forum? It's a perfect segue. So we're going to move into the open forum. And Michael, as you said, this really is a start from the board's perspective. Our plan here is for Jonathan and Leah to lead us in this discussion. We've put 35 minutes on the agenda, but we're going to start early, so you might even have 40 minutes if you need it. This will be followed up if there's further questions. I think we've planned that they could come back in August if necessary, but then the follow-up planned with community education as we go into September, and really to do as much as we can to educate folks. So Michael, exactly what you said, and I appreciate the Finance Committee being here, but also taking it on your side. And I would just encourage residents, taxpayers, business owners, et cetera, with any questions or comments to share those with us as we move forward, because this really is about hoping to get everybody on the same page, educate folks as we kind of what tax classification is, the roles folks play, and really help people better understand as we approach our tax classification hearing later this fall. So with that, Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Can I just add, sorry, I just wanted to add kind of the timeline and kind of where this came from is that at the board's retreat, we talked about the need for some education around tax classification. So it was not only a goal of the board to put education materials out to the community, but also a goal that you had created for me. So this, as we've said, this is the first of multiple presentations, and our expectation is that in September we would do a more public forum type meeting where we could have some other questions and some presentations perhaps from the community. So
Great. Thank you, Christy. The floor is yours.
Hello there, board members. Thank you for having me. My name is Jonathan Steinberg. I act as your chief assessor. And tonight's goal is to, as you mentioned, educate yourselves and the public about tax classification. The focus really is to break it down and simplify it. As I've been told when I present and talk frequently, it is not so simple. So hopefully tonight I'll be able to do just that. The primary goal tonight is to understand that there are two key factors that need to be known before you can even get to your tax classification hearing and do any sort of consideration analysis as to what those numbers are going to be. The first is the levy, and the second is the value. And it's those two key factors that go into the math that's going to determine what your tax rate is. So tonight, we're going to define what that levy is and what that term means. It is the amount to be raised, and we'll get to that in a minute. We're going to understand what classification is as it relates to property. The apportionment of the levy between the residential, commercial, industrial, and personal property as the types of property, and the role of the select board when it comes to the classification hearing, the shift of the levy, the residential exemption, and the small commercial exemption, the decisions that are made at the classification hearing. I just want to acknowledge the fact that I did receive all of your questions. Some will be answered tonight. Some may go beyond the depth of this evening, at which point we can follow up in other ways, or if you have questions, you'll let me know. So the levy. The definition of the levy, the total amount to be raised by a community through real and personal property taxes. For most communities, this is their largest source of revenue, okay? The levy is the amount to be raised after local receipts. So you determine all of the amounts that need to be raised for a year. So at town meeting, you go, you vote, and you say, we need to raise and appropriate certain funds for certain things. And you end up at the end of the year with the total amount that needs to be raised. And that includes state charges and other expenses, including the overlay. From that total amount to be raised, you then take out and you credit estimated local receipts that include things like excise, permit fees, hotel motel taxes, restaurant taxes, state aid, and other sources of monies, enterprise funds or free cash, that offset that total amount to be raised. So if, when you have those capital items that are included in that, you need to raise funds to pay for those capital items, your source of those funds is the free cash transfer. So those monies are not coming out of your tax monies. What's remaining after you've appropriated all that is what you call the levy, the total amount to be raised after other sources of money. That's what comes from your property taxes. So just to put it in perspective for fiscal '22, the total amount to be raised for fiscal '22 was $129,803,000 and change. The estimated receipts and other revenue sources was $46,054,897. The remaining taxes to be raised from property taxes, again, this is what the levy is, $83,748,220. So when we set a tax rate of $18.49 back in November of 2021, it was in order to raise $83 million from property taxes, okay? And that's your levy. The other factor of that is property taxes, right? There's a number of different classifications of property tax. And this is the first step towards the process of being able to determine who pays what taxes, right? Is you need a value. The first thing you need is a total value of the town, but before you can do that, you need your assessor to set those values, to figure out what are things valued at, what are the market values. So in terms of classifications of properties, the first one and the largest is residential properties. And residential properties includes more than just single-family houses. Anything that is a residential property is residential, whether there's 1 or 300 units. Whether it's an income-producing property, if it's residential, it's a residential property. If there was to be a shift in the levy, they would pay the residential rate. Doesn't matter how many units it is, it doesn't matter if it's income-producing, residential is residential, okay? Open space. We in Westboro do not have open space. There's actually not that many communities in Massachusetts who do because of the definition of it. Our space that would be open is either in chapter or it is vacant land, developable or undevelopable. Commercial property, general office type, hotel, recreation, retail, storage, things like that fall under the commercial, contrasting with industrial property, which is much more manufacturing related, research and development, utility, and companies that will work in a way to incorporate themselves into that process. So if it's an administrative office for an industrial company, typically that's not an industrial building versus a company that is part of the process of industry, even if it's shipping and receiving, there's some sort of industrial type. Now, there are office buildings that are an industrial style based upon the use, the typical occupant of that, which is very different than your typical multi-tenanted office. And the last one is personal property, which is machinery and equipment used in the conduct of business. And what falls within that class varies dependent upon the type of corporation it is. And like with AstraZeneca, when they changed corporation status, it changed what is taxable within their company, and that can go for good and bad. If a company that is an LLC that is taxable for everything becomes incorporated, lots of their assets no longer are taxable. So we spend the year doing this research. We spend the year out there inspecting properties, figuring out what use they are, if things have changed use. We have a lot of properties lately that have gone from multi to single family, okay? Even though that's within the residential class, we need to categorize it properly for use. It's the same thing with new construction. If we have something that went from vacant land, is it now an industrial building, or did it go from commercial to industrial? So that happens throughout the year as we're visiting our properties, as we're exploring permits, as sales are happening, so that when we get to the time to set our values and categorize our properties, we're making sure things go into the right place. So these two things come together, the levy and the value, to calculate the tax rate. So we're going to simplify the numbers a little bit just to put it into perspective. If your total taxes to be raised were $1 million, and the levy divided by what we're going to determine is the rate, which is the levy, at how much do we need to raise per thousand to get to that. So we take a value of $100 million. It looks like I'm missing a line here. And we take our $1 million that we need to raise, and we do that division. So we take $1 million that needs to be raised, we divide it by the total value of the town, and we multiply by 1,000. So that's going to get you how many dollars per thousand you need to raise. And I apologize, there was one more line in there that somehow seemed to disappear. But we're going to get back to this example to lay it out a little cleaner as we go. There you go. There's the line. Total property value is $100 million. Yeah, you know. Yeah, it was there. You know, usually, as you know, my slides are a little blander than this, but you know, people have told me that I throw up all these numbers, and I'm the only one that can see what's in those numbers, so I'm trying to break them out a little bit. So here's an example that'll simplify things a little further. So in our example, we have a total value of the town of $100 million. And we have a total levy of $1 million. And just like in our town, we have a 70% residential value and a 30% commercial, industrial, and personal property value. So 70 million in residential value, 30 million in commercial, industrial. And for the purpose of this one, we're going to use the same valued property, okay? $500,000 property for both single family and commercial, so that you can see the impact on this as we go through. So with the single rate, you have a rate of $10 per thousand, and you have a tax bill of $5,000 on both sides. You have one rate, you have $100 million, and you need to raise $1 million, right? At $10,000, that gets you to $1 million. At $5,000 is your average tax bill. Now, when we start talking about shifting the rate, what we're really doing is shifting the levy, okay? And we're going to come back to this as we get a little further in. But what you're seeing here is it's the amount to be raised that is shifting, okay? So when you first shift here, right, you're taking 10% of what is the commercial industrial property, which is $30,000, and you're taking it away from the residential amount to be raised. So that residential amount to be raised has been reduced by $30,000. So now instead of raising $700,000 from the residential property, you're going to raise $670,000. And that $30,000 is going to go over to the other side. So in doing so, the average property of $500,000 is going to save $214. And the average commercial of the same value, that $500,000 commercial property, is going to pay an additional $500. And the reason that is you're dealing with bigger numbers. So you have $700,000 in value that $30,000 reduction is being spread out across, versus the $300,000 that it's being picked up by, okay? Which is why you have a disproportionate increase onto the commercial versus the reduction on the residential. To take it a step further, if it was a 20%, now you're shifting $60,000, right? And just to reiterate, you're shifting the percentage based upon what percent of the commercial, industrial, personal property total levy would have been raised, right? So the percentage is based upon that, because you can't exceed a certain amount in terms of shifting that. So the commercial, industrial, personal property will never have to pay more than 150% of what they would have. So in this case, they were going to have to raise $300,000. They will not have to, you cannot shift more than $150,000. So that being said, the $700,000 could not be reduced more than $150,000. I apologize if I'm jumping right into it. And again, one step further, 30%. So now we're shifting $90,000. So you see that $700,000 to be raised by the residential property has been reduced by $610,000. And the increase on the commercial, industrial, personal property, again, $90,000 more to be raised by them. So they're going to get an increase on that same property of $1,500 versus that same $500,000 property with a residential use is going to save $643. And you can see that trend continues up until the 50% shift. And one thing to point out here is you'll see on the right-hand side where it says percent of levy in the second column, that's percent of the total levy. So it was originally 30%. The commercial, industrial, personal property represented 30%. And that percent they're paying of the levy is based upon their percent of the property value, right? There's a tie-in there. The amount that they're going to be based on paying in taxes is based simply upon their percent of property value. With a single rate, if there's 5% commercial, industrial, personal property, they're going to pay 5% of the levy, okay? It's directly tied to that. Once you start shifting is where you're taking some of the burden from the residential properties and putting it onto the commercial, industrial, personal properties. So in this case, what was originally 30% is now 45%. So out of that $1 million, originally the commercial, industrial, and personal property were paying $300,000, and now they're going to contribute $450,000. And that extra $150,000 has been reduced on the residential side. So you're literally shifting the taxes to be raised from one use to another. And I say one use to another because I want to reiterate the fact that it's not just your single-family residential properties that benefit from this, okay? It's the residential class. So taking that one step further, if you looked at our 2022 numbers, and just for the public, the reason we're using 2022 numbers is those are numbers that we know, right? We don't know what the values are, and we don't know what the total spending is going to be. We haven't had October town meeting. So until you know those two numbers, we can't really do that math. And so we're using known factors because we know what the 2022 numbers were, okay? And so these are the actual 2022 numbers. I'm not going to read them in detail, but we had $4.5 billion in value, and we needed to raise $83.7 million. And we had a split of 69.67% of residential class and 30.33% on the commercial, industrial, personal property side. Now, typically when we go through this, we go through with the average commercial and average residential property, right? So in this case, just staying consistent with the $500,000 property on both sides, recognizing the fact that there aren't a lot of commercial industrial properties that fall within that category, but so that you can see the apples to apples side of it. With the single tax rate like we had, 1849, right, they're going to have the same tax bill. If we shift 10%, you see a $402 reduction on the residential side for that $500,000 property, and you see a $924 increase on that $500,000 commercial property. At 20%, similar, $805 decrease on the residential side and $1,849 increase on the commercial side. And as you go further out to the 30, 40, and 50%. Now, mind you, if you are considering, when people, communities consider splitting, they're not tied to these round percentages. There's lots of numbers in between there. For example, for the purpose of presentation and trying to be less confusing, I'm presenting them in round numbers, but obviously there's lots of numbers along the way. So at the end of the year, we get to our classification hearing. I've set the values, and we'll get to what that timeline looks like. But when we get to the classification hearing, this is where it all comes to a head. This is where the rubber hits the road in decision time. The classification hearing is where the Board of Selectmen set the policy as to how they're going to apportion the tax levy. They do not set the tax rate. They decide how much of the levy to shift from one class to another, okay? And their first vote is whether to maintain a single tax rate or to shift a portion of the levy between classes. The second vote is whether to adopt what is the residential exemption. And the third vote is to whether or not to adopt a small commercial exemption. There is a fourth vote about an open space exemption. However, because we don't classify any property as open space, we don't act on that one. So we talk a lot about the pros and cons of shifting, right? What are the benefits? What are the cons? The pros are very simple. It offers tax relief for residential property owners. We hear a lot about tax relief. This is a method to provide tax relief to residential property owners. The cons: higher commercial taxes inhibits commercial growth. Companies considering similar locations may elect to go elsewhere. And the difficulty is people frequently want data to support this. The problem is you don't know what you don't get. If they're not going to come here, you don't know that they were considering coming here and they changed their mind. We do have some evidence of companies within my career here in 10 years that came here considering properties both here and in Marlborough. And they came here. One of the reasons was because we had a lower tax rate. They pay over $100,000 in taxes every year. If you were a business and you were considering moving someplace, if you had a choice of taking on an additional $100,000 in expenses in a similar location, I think that would be one of the factors that you would consider. And it is, and they do consider it. But again, there's no way to know what you don't get. It's similar to zoning. If you don't have friendly zoning and you don't have zoning that entices people to build certain things in certain areas, you don't know who's even considering it, okay? You see other companies going to other towns, and you might say, hey, why didn't they come here? But who knows where they go? I mean, they consider all sorts of things. Westboro is a great location, okay? And people do choose by location for certain types of business. But there are other types of business where location is less important. If you're building an industrial property, your clients aren't coming to your property. Ease of access is not always the first and foremost on your mind. As long as you are somewhat proximal to a major highway, depending on what your courier route is, it might not matter quite as much, okay? And the cost associated might matter more, okay? With higher property taxes comes higher rent. Okay, property taxes are passed on to the tenants and the businesses. in many cases, in many lease scenarios, they are paying property taxes by the tenants, okay? And so that can drive up rents because the property owners are not necessarily going to eat the higher taxes. In a community that has lower taxes, they're paying less common area charges. Similarly, commercial higher taxes can impact the property values. It's, again, the same argument, is higher expenses can cause a decline in the value, because when you value commercial properties, you're valuing a business. Someone's going to invest in that property and the revenue generated by that property. In some cases, that revenue will be driven by the rent that that they can absorb. And if there are higher taxes, they may not be able to charge as much in raw rent because they have to pass on the taxes, or it may impact their vacancy. There's lots of different scenarios. Or there are some cases where the landlord pays the taxes, okay? And then they're taking that expense right on. Or if it's going to be owner-occupied, and they're going to have to take on that expense of taxes. And then the last question is, it's allowed by law, but is it fair? You know, you'll hear a lot about from commercial industrial properties that it's not fair. And so that's, again, you get back to the policy question of taxation. And no one can answer that for yourselves except you. So walking through the numbers from our tax classification last year, in the actual examples, looking at the realistic 2.5 million of the average commercial value. And bear in mind the fact that 2.5 million is a lot of money, right? But that's an average. So that means there's ones that are much higher than that, and there's plenty of them. And then there's ones that are lower than that. And the average single family of 558,576. So again, a single rate was 1849. That 10% shift saved the residential property owner $450, but it generated a $20.33 tax rate for the commercial industrial personal property, so their bill went up $4,782. At 20%, $899 for the savings for the residential property, $9,565 for the increase in the commercial industrial property. And again, additional examples. And so here's just looking at that from a percentage standpoint. The shift allowed, as I mentioned earlier, is up to 150%. Okay, we've always used a single rate, and you can see the ratio of the savings to the residential average property and the cost to the commercial industrial property. And graphically, it looks like this. I know we like visuals, right? And that sort of wraps up the summary of the classification as it is for the shifting of the rate. The why we do it, the pros, the cons, and the impact relative to the actual tax savings or increase in taxes in class versus class. That, in a nutshell, is what the classification side of it is about. Okay? Getting to the two exemptions that are discussed. The residential exemption has certain criteria. As it says here, only 15 of 351 communities adopt this residential exemption. What they all have in common is they all either have lots of second homes or lots of investment properties. One of the requirements of a residential exemption is it must be the primary residence, okay? And so when you have lots of investment properties, multifamilies, you have lots of properties that don't qualify for the residential exemption. When you have lots of second homes, they don't qualify either. So here's an opportunity for them to give a benefit in Nantucket, for example, to the property owners that actually live in Nantucket versus the ones that have their second homes there. So in looking at this, okay, when we look at it from how many properties in town could qualify for this, I don't track how many are owner occupied and how many are private, are primary residences. I don't know that information. So when I come up with this 4,870 properties, I'm simply looking at a property type that could qualify for this exemption if it would fall into this category, okay? The maximum you could shift is 35% of the average residential property value. Now, what's different between this and the other shift is this is a value shift, okay? So you're literally shifting value within the residential class away from certain people that'll be paid by other people. And I'll get to the example as to what that means shortly, okay? But by doing that, it creates a natural break point. So it's going to create a higher residential rate because the residential properties still need to raise the same amount of the levy, okay? So in that initial example, when they had to raise $700,000, they still need to raise $700,000 from the residential property. But now what you're doing is you're exempting a certain amount from each property. So each property out of that 4,870 properties that are going to receive an exemption will get a reduction in value. But yet the total amount to be raised stays the same from the residential class. None of this involves the commercial, industrial, or personal property, okay? And so some owners are going to receive a benefit, okay, that are going to be paid for by others. It creates a natural break point because at some point, the savings opportunity from someone who lives, in this case, in a house over $648,807. So if I live in a $700,000 house and you do the math, I might get a break on my value, but because you're using a higher multiple, a higher rate, my taxes are going up anyways. So even though you've lowered my value by the exemption amount, the amount to make up for the total lowered value is going to create a higher residential rate, so I'm going to be paying for that tax break that's going to other taxpayers. One of the things that's different compared to other statutory exemptions we have is this exemption, the sole qualifications are that it's your primary residence. There is no income or asset requirements. There's no test for income or assets. So you could have someone who has a second home, either in Westboro or in Florida. They could have 3 homes. You know, they can live in a small house and have downsized and have, you know, very high income, and they're going to get a break on their taxes at the cost of other property owners, okay? And so just looking at where that falls, this is the curve of where the property values are that fall within this. So that mark, that 648,900 was the next one up over the 648,807. So the property owners to the left, all those property owners will qualify for the exemption because their property is worth less. And the property owners to the right are going to pay for that. So there's about 1,000 property owners that would pick up relative to whatever exemptions would be granted. So here's just an example of the math. The average residential value, and just to point out, that's not the average single-family value, that's the residential value. So that includes all residential properties, okay? And that's the average of those values. At 10%, it's $56,097. And so if you took the eligible number of properties and you multiplied it by 56,097, you get that 273 million. So as an individual property owner, if my house was valued at $500,000 and there was a 10% exemption, I would reduce my value by $56,097 if I received this exemption. Okay, so now I would be taxed on $444,000 and change. And so if the total residential was 3.15 million, and we took out that 273 that we are exempting, that leaves us with 2.882 billion. Thank you, Leah. And so we're going to still raise the same amount of money, but now with a lower number. Okay, so in this case, in 2022, they needed to raise $58 million. And that $58 million, instead of being divided by the 3.15 billion, it's going to be divided by the 2.88 billion to get an adjusted tax rate of $20.24. So, as in last year, the commercial industrial rate is still going to be $18.49 if we were to maintain a single rate, but now the residential rate would be $20.24. And here's just a couple examples. If you use the average single family, they would benefit by $157.91. A higher valued property at $900,000, it will cost them $439.59. In a lower valued property, if their property is valued at $350,000, they'd receive a bigger benefit of $522.91.
So Jonathan, just,
Yep,
sorry, if we can jump in with questions here.
that's fine.
So that now a residential taxpayer that doesn't qualify for this exemption, so it's a second home, they would still pay the higher rate, the 2024, at their original value. Is that
They would pay the higher rate at their original value.
because they don't get the reduction in value?
Right. But one of the reasons that that's done more frequently in properties that have a high number of rental properties or second homes is because you would have less properties within Westboro that are not owner occupied, essentially. Do they exist? Absolutely. I mean, let's face it, there's lots of multifamilies and other properties. There's lots of single families and condos that aren't their primary residence. So those properties would not qualify, but primarily the vast majority of properties in Westboro are owner occupied.
Yep.
John, regarding you said in the beginning when we were talking about residential exemptions, that's not, the 4,870 homes is based on the property type, so it's just an estimate. So it's not something you're tracking now in terms of who would qualify.
Correct.
Can you give us a sense of, and maybe you can't hear, but what would that take for your department? And there must be a process, right? So people have to apply annually. I do recall that.
Yep.
And so you have to ask for, I guess the first question is, a homeowner would have to ask for the exemption?
They have to ask for the exemption, they apply. You're really attesting to the fact that it is your primary residence. We're not going out and knocking on the door.
Yep. Checking when
But
they're sleeping at night
They're
or
signing
something.
away
Yeah.
and stating as a fact
Yeah.
that they are attesting to the fact that that is their primary residence.
Okay. And just given your line of work, is there any way to estimate how many of the 4,800 potentially could apply here in Westboro? I'm just trying to think of even attestations, what kind of work volume that creates for your department. And the cost of that, right? So there might be savings to some, but there could be additional costs.
It's a substantial number, it's thousands of properties that would qualify. Would there be a way to probably give some guesstimate? Probably, if I cross-referenced with the voter records and sort of did one of those comparisons. Relative to the annual, there are communities that don't require it annually. Whether or not they're supposed to, my understanding is that they are.
Yeah.
Relative to the rights of other taxpayers, if they're not requiring annually, if they're still not their residential primary residence, then, they're skating. So I don't know that I would go that route.
Sure.
But I guess to get back to the workload, it'd be substantial. I mean, there'd be, but to be honest, there are plenty of people that wouldn't bother with it. There are plenty of people who frankly, amazingly enough, there's lots of things.
Sure.
They don't get asked for excise abatements. There's, people put priorities in different places.
Okay, thank you.
Patrick?
Yeah, first of all, John, thank you for doing all the work to pull this together, and certainly all the information you provided to us beforehand. It was very helpful. I think similar question to Shelby's perhaps is, these numbers represent, I think, an all-in, meaning all 4,800 residents that are eligible apply, and therefore the increase on the average high-value single-family property property would go up to 439. That's the max that it would hit in that
Well,
example for that property size.
It's,
Property value, is that correct?
that's actually not the max, because this is only with the 10% shift.
Right, but I
So,
mean, under
yes,
this
under
scenario.
this scenario, that is based upon the worst-case scenario
So
of
in
all
theory, if
4800.
only 20, let's say 20%, or make it easy, 50% of the people out of those 4,800 homes don't apply for it, then that number 439 would drop in half, in theory. Something like that.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I think it's important when we talk about this exemption, we use the term landowner or property owner, not homeowner, because it covers all residential properties. And while condos or owner-occupied apartment stock isn't. Right? If you have so I assume if I own a building that has 10 apartments in it, even if I live in one of the 10 apartments, it's not considered owner-occupied.
Correct, over a certain amount.
Over
You
a
know,
certain amount.
Yes.
And so I also think it's safe to assume that a 10-unit apartment building has a higher valuation than the average single-family home.
Well, the only thing I would say,
Or
just
above
relative to the number of properties, I did not include those multifamily properties in that.
No, but my.
I understand,
My
in the
point is,
valuation
my
side.
point is, they're not eligible for the exemption.
Correct.
Which means they're going to pay the higher tax rate on their full
Original
value.
full value.
Correct.
So,
Our housing demographics, particularly around apartments in Westboro, are skewed to larger buildings, 8 or 10, or, the vast majority of our apartments are in large complexes, actually. So I guess my concern, the side effect of this exemption is knowing that those properties won't qualify for the exemption, and if the rate goes from 18.6 to 20.2, that's roughly about a 20% increase in the property taxes that those larger apartment complexes are going to pay. That cost will get passed on to the tenants, and we'll see increased rents.
Yeah,
Would
they
be
would
my
get hit pretty
expectation.
hard by this.
They get
Yeah.
hit pretty hard. And it would make apartments even less affordable, potentially. Or I guess I would expect that, so.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect the
can we,
landlord to pay to eat it.
that back.
can we just clarify a point, though? At the very beginning of the presentation, you had mentioned that all residential property, regardless, is residential property. So
Correct.
clarify, explain to me what Alan is saying. I want to
So
understand.
all residential property are going to pay the residential rate, right? So with this shift, you're taking property value away from the owner-occupied property, okay? But that total residential class still needs to raise the same amount of money, okay? So you're shifting value away from all those properties, but you still need to raise the same amount. So it's going to generate a higher tax rate. So the higher tax rate, okay, is going to apply to a apartment building that's worth $53 million. And so at $53 million, when you add $3 to the tax rate, it's a big hit.
Yeah.
And so the point is really, I think, if I understand, Alan, is that that shift has a more substantial impact on those larger property owners as well, relative to how similar to a split or something like that would impact commercial industrial properties.
So we're not setting, in those large occupancy buildings, we're not setting the taxes based on unit. It's on the total property.
Well, no, the value is a different story. So the tax rate is based upon use, simply what it's used for. You live in it, it's a residential property.
Right, but it's-
But they wouldn't qualify because they're
Right.
not owner occupied, like within the subgroup. So it's like residential,
Right.
and then the subgroup,
Understand one thing, is their valuation model is based upon number of units. So they're $53 million for a reason, right?
Yeah.
They're $53 million because there's 346 units in there,
Right.
okay? And their model of valuation is based upon what a buyer would consider. A buyer is going to consider the income generated by that. So even you're talking about an income property, it's a residential income property.
Does that change with a condominium where the resident is the owner of the condominium?
Yes. Most of our condominiums would qualify for this.
Okay. Interesting.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess my point is I'm concerned that if this shifts burden to multi-family rental units, the demographics of the residents of those are are more likely lower income than some of the single-family homeowners who would be receiving the benefit. And you might actually be effectively shifting the tax burden to lower-income households from upper-income households because they
In a
rent a larger complex rather than owning a single family.
In an unintended way.
In an unintended way, right, unintended way. So I always worry about
Yeah.
the law of unintended consequences, right? So it's.
Yeah, and bear in mind that there's no qualification other than living in the property. So you're also giving a tax benefit to someone who may not need it. There might be someone in a property that's worth $649,000 that they bought for $30,000 a long time ago. And they can't necessarily afford to move, and the only reason their property is worth $649,000 is because they live in Westboro, and it's a desirable place to be. But they may be house poor, right? And they can't afford that increase. But yet the person who downsized, who doesn't need the benefit, is getting a benefit. Again, there's a reason why so many communities that have a larger base that absorb this, because it affects that break-even point.
Which, if I may, was a question that I posed to you in an email, and if you don't have the answer now, but perhaps something to bring to the table later, are there any other options for exemptions that the town is allowed to establish by vote?
Yeah, so I could send you an email. I did a presentation a few years ago about statutory exemptions, and the town of Westboro, not to go down this path, but does everything possible within the current statutory and above and beyond, right down to a 0% interest deferral program. And the Senior Taxation Relief Committee will be bringing forward a warrant article in October, hopefully that you will support, that will be for a home rule petition for another exemption, so that we can continue our work towards, finding alternate ways to do that based upon means and income and assets.
Great. Jonathan, I'm just looking at our time, and we're slightly over, but I know you have more here, so.
Well, the small commercial exemption shouldn't take too long. One of the questions was, when do we determine this? There are 45 properties that we estimate might be eligible. So these are commercial properties only, class 3, not industrial properties. They must be valued under $1 million. All tenants within that must have 10 employees or less. The maximum reduction they can receive is 10% of value. Again, to be shifted within, in this case, the commercial industrial properties. And the way we identify that is we get a list from the Department of Labor. We get it sometime late summer or in September, and that's when we go out and we do our research. We go through the list, we eliminate all the properties that are industrial, we eliminate all the properties over $1 million, and then we go out and do boots on the ground and we take a look. Because it needs to be all the businesses within there, and not, the DOL does not report 100% of businesses. So that's where we come up with the 45 properties. They would need to apply, and this exemption is one that goes on the real estate. There is no requirement that the property owner pass this on to the tenants because they are lower valued properties. Typically, these are the ones where the owner pays the taxes, not the tenants. And so this is a this is an exemption that really goes to the property owners. There's only 14 communities of the 351 that have adopted it. And just to touch on the timeline, as I mentioned, throughout the year, we're going through and doing our permit inspections and sales inspections. Each year, the valuation effective date is January 1st. So for fiscal 22, it was January 1st of 21. For fiscal 23, it will be January 1st of 22. So the sales analysis will use 2021 sales for fiscal 23. And that's important to remember. All those properties that are selling next door to you, those will be fiscal 24 sales. And then one of the deadlines to be aware of is our June 1st deadline, which is the assessing it's our office's deadline for really having all of our preliminary work done. So we do our best to capture construction along the way, to capture for the preliminary bills, and that's our first deadline for capturing improvements. And then our actual deadline for new construction is June 30th. okay? June 30th, while January 1st is the deadline for assessment dates, June 30th is the deadline for improvement. So if there's new construction, like Pulte, for example, we walk every floor of a building that's under construction, and we evaluate its percent complete, and we apply that as a reduction on its value. And then when they get a CO, when it's complete, they get an apportioned supplemental bill. So they do get a bill from the date of the CO until the end of the fiscal year, provided that the value goes up over a certain percent. The sales analysis, okay, starts really at the summertime. As soon as I'm done with the abatement period and I'm done with our getting ready for our billing, come now is when I really try to get into the sales. My staff has been going out and evaluating the sales. We're making sure that we've got inspections and evaluating them to make sure that we can then do the sales analysis. Okay, we can capture our growth through our permit entering, okay? And all that comes to a head in October and November, okay? The final values are set usually just after October town meeting, as well as once we have that total spending and we know what our levy is, we can then work to finalize the classified values, get them signed off on, and get a certified rate. Typically, the classification hearing this has been in and around Thanksgiving, usually the meeting right before it, so that we get back from Thanksgiving, I can work with Leah and we can get a tax rate set. And that's the general timeline as to what happens through the year. And I'll have this available to you after, that gives you sort of the range of the reporting and the sign-offs and authorizations that happen through the state, with one of the key dates being that town meeting date. Because in order to really understand, you need two things. You need values to be done so that you know what your values are, and you need your levy to be done. And those are the two things. If our values come in higher and our levy comes in lower, it's all good. If our levy comes in higher, you know, if we need to raise more money, it's pretty binary. Taxes go up.
Great, thank you. I think as we started with this for the board, I mean, if there's any remaining questions right now, quick ones, but we do tentatively have a hold for an August meeting to have follow-up if we need it. What I would suggest is if there's follow-up questions, send them through Christie, then we can determine whether that meeting for us is necessary. There is definitely the plan, though, to bring this out to a more public forum in September. But for us as a board, this was great, but if there are follow-on questions that you come up with or think about over the next couple of weeks, get that through Christie, and then we can coordinate putting this on another agenda in August if we need to.
Can I ask a clarifying question just on the, this was one of my questions to you, John, in the email. Just, can you clarify the, like, improvements? I understand new construction.
Yeah, so what you were referring to there was that segment out of the new growth is what can be considered new growth in that section as it's counted. So that improvements, if someone renovates a bathroom, if someone does an addition, those are things that generate new growth.
Yep.
The other adjustments, the market adjustments, the analysis adjustments or adjustments based upon data tables, those go into the valuation. Okay, but that section you were grabbing from was all about new growth.
Okay.
And so we are very clear, and when I provide the numbers to the state, have to delineate what is new growth and what is adjusted values based upon the market. And the adjusted values come in two phases. It's getting my sales approved and then adjusting the total town values. So there's a couple steps there.
Great. Any follow-up questions? Perfect. Jonathan, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I
As
hope I
always.
didn't jump into it too much, but I hope you took away a little bit of a better understanding of what happens when you shift and where that comes from and goes.
Great. Thank you. A lot to digest, but this is great. And as Christie said, this was a goal of the select board, also a goal that we gave to Christie. So, Christie, thanks for organizing. Leah and John, thanks for your work here, and definitely more to come. Okay, next on the agenda is site plan overview for 180 and 182 Turnpike Road. Good, how are you?
Good evening. Thank you for having us tonight. I'm Marshall Gould. I'm the attorney for Automotive Management Services, Inc., who are looking to develop the property, or redevelop, I should say, the property at 180 and 182 Turnpike Road here in Westboro. I'll just introduce the parties. I think you all know Randy Waterman from WDA Design Group, and I'd like to introduce you to the two parties who just flew up from Florida and landed or got to Westboro about an hour ago.
Welcome.
This is Nick, good thing it wasn't rush hour traffic too heavy. Nick Burnt is in charge of their facilities design, and he's the construction director. And next to him is Ashley Sino, who will be in Westboro a lot. She's going to be the project manager. So with that in mind, it's two parts tonight. Very briefly, Nick will talk to you about his goals for the project, who they are, so that you'll know who the applicant is. And then we're going to have Randy walk you through the plans. And I just want to say, I'm actually right now in the middle of two meetings, this one here and a planning board meeting on a different project. So I left that one to come over here. If you see me leaving, it's not disrespect, and I apologize, but I do have to get back there because mine is ongoing as we
Yeah.
speak.
Multitasking.
So I'll stay a little bit. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marshall.
everybody.
Good evening.
Evening.
As Marshall was saying, we're looking forward to developing the property. I'm a privately held automotive group. We're looking to construct a Hyundai dealership on the existing site. Very excited about it. It's immediately adjacent to CarMax. Of course, after the last meeting, meeting, looking forward to bringing additional tax revenue to the town as well. So I just want to give a brief introduction. If there's any questions that I can answer preliminarily, of course, I'll be here and happy to answer any more questions when we're done as well.
Great.
Not at this time.
Okay, any questions? Not at this time, but thanks.
So I'll just kind of walk you through the existing conditions a little bit and then jump to the proposed building.
Yeah, can you,
Architecture.
try to use the microphone as much as
Or just
possible.
turn it.
Yeah.
Does that work? Thank you. So this is the existing property in green. This is Route 9 at the top edge of the plan. There were two different parcels that are involved in the property. This is number 182 Turnpike Road. It's a 2-acre site. There's an existing office building there owned by Patriot Financial. So there's a 2-story office of about 20,000 square feet. And this rectangular lot right here is the 2 acres that property is on. There's about 80 existing parking spaces. The building was built almost 40 years ago, so it's in pretty tough shape right now. That building actually, strangely enough, it's on Route 9 and it's still connected to a septic system and a private well. So obviously the septic system would need to be removed and we would reuse the well for irrigation for the future project. The second lot, number 180, is the one on the east side of the property. This lot is a total of 7.3 acres. It's fairly rectangular at the street. And then several years ago in a land trade with CarMax, the former railroad right-of-way for the Boston Worcester Rail was added to this piece. So this property now is this entire area of green that goes all the way up to Park Street. On the plan, this is the westerly boundary of the CarMax parking lot. So their new building falls just off the site here. And then over on the far west side of the property, this is Park Street here, Route 9 on the top. This is the Walker Meadow condominiums next door. And just for reference, that's Curry Copy's building at the top of the hill, the blue building. So again, in total, there's 2 acres on the westerly parcel and just about 7.3 on the easterly parcel that abuts CarMax. This plan zooms in now on just the two primary building sites. Essentially, both buildings would be raised and removed from the property. All the parking, utilities essentially get removed, so it would be stripped down to essentially two open construction sites. The building is about 45,000 square feet in total area. Again, it's a Hyundai dealership. The front third or so of the building is all sales, and the back two-thirds would be service, car wash service, quick oil, things like that, but mostly service related. Building setback about 86 feet or so from Route 9, but it essentially covers most of that easterly property. Most of the surface parking is over on the west side of the property. We're retaining the two entrance driveways as they are today, where they exit off of Route 9. So vehicles, essentially employees and car delivery carriers, would come into this westerly entrance. There would be a gate right here, and they could enter the site freely and move around all the way to a gate at this location where they then would leave the site. Customers would be directed to the easterly entrance, and they would come in here, and this parking in the front is for customers. This is the service bay drop-offs where they would enter service and go into the service of the building. So again, there'd be a gate on both sides to control. So this back area is really just car carriers, employees, and emergency vehicles would be able to pass through the site and utilize the gates. The new building would be connected to both sewer and water, obviously. The building over on the east side right now is connected to the sewer line at the back of the site. Water runs down from Route 9 and is connected on the right-hand side of the building. The other key feature of the building, I guess, is there are 2 levels of parking deck above the existing building or the proposed building structure. So there would be a ramp down at this southwest corner. So vehicles could come in that are being stored on the property, would be able to go up the ramp into the building, and then there's 2 levels of deck there in the building itself. And those we're classifying as storage, vehicle storage and display spaces, slightly smaller than the normal space that's utilized in the rest of the surface parking lot. There's about 237 total spaces on the site. There's only about, 35, 39 spaces out at the front for customers, and then in the 2 decks, there's about 198 total parking spaces. The site would be appropriately landscaped as we show on these plans. Mostly, flowers and shrubs at the front, so you get a nice appearance, and sod at the front, so that we're not blocking the views to the cars. The sides are more, the right side is obviously mostly paved today. The left side would be re-landscaping this area after the slopes are graded, and we've got some flowering trees on this side. And then in the back, we went with the dense evergreens in the back of the site to give you more of a screen to the residents that are beyond the property. There's a small wetland on the property, and there's no work proposed in the wetland at all. As a matter of fact, the parking lot that backs up to the wetland is about 40 feet deep and touches the wetland today. So the plan is to remove all of that pavement, push all the grading 40 feet away from the wetland, re-establish that area with wetland plant species, and not have any impact. And also the drainage system today just runs directly into the wetland. So we'll be putting in a full suite of catch basins with connected pipes, and there'd be a storm trap system in the back that would be underground, and that would provide the detention and the infiltration on the property. So no work in the wetland resource at all, and recapturing and regrading and landscaping that buffer zone essentially between where the wetland edge is. Let's see. That's mainly the site. The building, just for general reference purposes. These are a couple of different views. We've got 4 perspective views, one from each different angle. These are the elevation views. This lower view down here, this one is the main the elevation that you would see from Route 9. So again, this is the main feature of the building here, and then the 2 levels of decks, and you can see the railing, open railing around them, and there's just a few areas where you'd be able to get up in staircases and so forth to get to the upper deck levels. But that's essentially what the building would look like. A tan surface, these are aluminum panels. These are the 3 service bays on the side of the building that I mentioned that you would go into. This is the front door of the building where you would go into the sales department. And then these are the 3 doors, overhead doors for the delivery of vehicles, people picking up new vehicles. They'd be able to go inside, get the vehicle, and come out this direction. As I mentioned, as you're pulling in from the west side, the second entrance over on the west of the side, you'd be able to come down to the building. This is the ramp that I mentioned. It actually goes into the building, comes up to the top, and so you'd be able to go to the upper level, or as you get up to the second level, you could go into the second level. But essentially, it's 2 levels of parking deck on top of each other on top of the building. So essentially a 3-story building. This zoning district allows 4 stories and 60 feet in elevation, so we'd be under both of those. And that's mainly it. The project is allowed by right. It'd be site plan approval with the planning board, and we have a filing with the Conservation Commission that should go in, that'll go in, I think, on Monday is their filing deadline. And we've already filed an application with the building department for the connection we have with DOT. Since we're on a former railway property, we had to file with them, even though the work on the right-of-way is extremely minor. So and that's mainly it.
Great. Thank you, Randy. Open up the board for questions or comments.
So the property, I think the 2 current buildings are somewhat different elevations.
Yes.
So how are you sort of handling that in the new development?
If we go back to this one, basically from the upper corner where you come off of Route 9, if you've been in there recently, it's a steep driveway in. So we're trying to flatten that out a little bit, but basically this grade from here to here today is about 30 feet in elevation drop across the property. So this parking lot is going to come down about 5% grade. So at 5%, we can catch up, and we're only filling down at the bottom, like we're cutting at the top a little bit and filling at the bottom. So we level that out pretty well. This is built on the more level section of the site. So the grade from the front to back here is, I think, 24 feet. So it's a little less. So there is a little bit of fill at the back here, and we're cutting into the grade at this front just to balance it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Patrick?
Yeah, so I'm glad to see the plantings around it. You know, a request I would have is wherever possible, try to use native regional plantings in the design.
Mm-hmm.
Also knowing that you mentioned that the screen on the backside in regards to Walker Meadow in that area, it's very close, as you can see there. You know, I think as you talk through this with the planning board, is to make sure that the lighting is appropriate down lighting and screened in some manner that it would be appropriate for that neighborhood not to be
Those are
lighted
called
up.
out on the lighting plans. Yep,
Yep.
definitely.
And then finally, maybe talk a little bit about if there's any, I'll say, green technologies or green plans for the project as far as any heating and cooling or other technologies that might be used for.
For the building itself?
Yep.
I will let Ashley address that one if there's anything in specific that we can refer to at this point, or?
There's nothing specific. We have a lighting control system in the building. Sorry.
Come on.
You wanna come-
We have a lighting control system in the building, but there's no specific other green technologies being incorporated at this time.
Okay. I would just ask
Yeah.
that wherever possible, keep that in mind. We're our community is very green conscious, and we're trying to drive as much of that technology into our buildings, our residences, as well as our commercial industrial properties.
Can I add to
I think he
that?
wants to add to this.
Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick. Obviously, everything will meet energy code. It's all high efficiency, rooftop units, things like that. And of course, with Hyundai, we're also incorporating a lot of electric vehicle technology. So there will be an abundance of EV chargers and things like that available.
Well, I didn't see that in our packet. That was one of our questions, unless I missed the icon, so.
Actually, just one quick
Yeah,
follow-up
I
question. You just maybe really, just let you know, we're the first community in the state of Massachusetts to have an EV energy show, car show in town. We did our first one last year. We're going to be doing another one this fall, so I'd encourage
Great.
the company to get involved wherever possible as being a new member of the community.
Yeah, absolutely.
So back to Shelby's question. So there are EV charging stations planned for?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they are on the site plans. There are a couple locations over on this side and one out as well for customers, but they're level 2 chargers, I believe, and there are at least 3 different locations.
Okay, okay.
I have a question because of knowing this property, and Randy, you know it well too, with the old Boston Worcester rail, this has long been proposed for our B-Walt multi-use trail. Has there been any discussion with the planning board? If not, I'd love to put it in there as a request for easements.
Yep.
To have that is a big area for us to gain easements.
Yep.
From the owner of the property. It's not shown here, not being developed, but that would be
Yep.
something that I would request for the planning board. I imagine they may already have talked about that. They know it well as also.
Yeah, we're actually fairly early in the process. We've gone to two one-stop meetings with all the department heads, and so that was brought up, and the applicant is well aware of how important the easement is. But we actually haven't even been in front of the planning board yet, so we haven't
Okay.
really gotten anything formal from the planning board. We don't have any comments on anything yet, so, but I think they're arranging the meeting or have a date already, so.
Okay.
But I think the applicants, we had a phone call with Christie and with Fred Leonardo as well a week or so ago, I believe, with both the applicants that are here, and so I think they're happy to figure it out and work it out through the town, but I think they don't have any information from the town, what else they want, and what are the conditions, or how big is the easement or anything. So I think they're happy to continue the discussion and figure out what the town's looking for. And
Great. Yeah, and with our role here, just as you know now, the site plan is kind of owned and granted by the planning board. Our job is to provide comments. I would ask that
Yep.
that comment just get
Definitely.
added in our comments to the planning board, so they'll
Yep.
have it, and let them as the experts
Yep.
work with you to
Yep.
figure it out. So.
Definitely, yep.
Alan?
Question. So, with the height restriction, does that include head houses and tops of lighting structures on the top of the parking deck?
It's 60 feet, but they exclude certain spires and other things on the building. I think Fred's here, he could probably answer clearer than that, but I believe we're under both those dimensions, 60 feet and 4 stories, obviously.
And you mentioned, and your team mentioned that it was being built to current energy code. Is that the standard or the stretch code?
I'm sorry, is it,
Is it the stretch code for energy efficiency, or?
Uh,
I think it has to be in Westboro, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And any intent as far as the level of LEED certification? LEED certification, any intent to go for a level of energy efficiency? No. Okay.
Let me just notice the fire chief back. I guess another question. I'm not aware of the structure. I like the idea and the concept of these 2 levels, but I'm assuming through the fire chief that for equipment and anything for them to have access, that's built and
Yes.
structured that way.
Yes, the chief attended the first one-stop meeting, and we talked about that at the meeting, but essentially, he would not send his vehicles up the ramp anyway, so he needs to have special equipment up there so that he could fight a fire if there was one. So the plumbing engineer has addressed the concerns, I believe, and has whatever types of, mechanical systems he needs up there. So he would just connect to those and not drive up there, obviously.
Okay. And then around the buildings, I know it's always about ensuring that we can get trucks around the
Yeah,
things that.
yeah, we've done the full turning radius around that. Essentially, he would really just come in mostly and go this way and
Around.
back straight out the same way, but it's set up so that he can actually come this way if he needs to. He can go up here and turn around in that parking lot, or he can come in and come into the front.
Perfect.
So, and I believe he's reviewed the plan. I don't know if the architectural plans have been submitted to the town yet or not.
Working on it.
Okay, so the plans have not gone to the town
Okay,
yet, so.
perfect. Other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you very much for the presentation. Welcome from Florida. You mentioned the gated entrance. Just concentrate on that a little bit. The first entrance will be gated. I presume there will be, or I would like to see, really obvious signage that is not a customer entrance, because I could see that being a very dangerous spot for people pulling in, realizing they can't get through a gate, trying to back up. You got
Yep.
Route 9, so that is of concern when I looked at the plans.
Okay.
So I would want that to see, be really obvious. I did look at the traffic study, and it, on the eastbound side, obviously you're coming down grade.
Mhm.
I'm not the engineer, so forgive the terms here. And it does appear that the line of sight is fine. Obviously, if the primary entrance is on the western side, then you got sort of more line of sight, I guess.
Yeah.
But I guess I have concerns about the speed of traffic and the entry there. I mean, we
Right.
do have CarMax.
Yeah.
It's working well now, but just that there would be, I don't know if, I don't think that there's a third, is there a third lane there now? No.
I don't
Still,
believe so.
still only two.
There's a decel lane as you're coming into the site, you can see here. So essentially, the high point is back near
Yep.
Curry Copy.
Okay,
So, but the two entrances that are on the project today aren't changing. We're
Yeah.
holding both of those.
okay. But there
So-
is sort of a lane to.
Yes, yeah,
okay,
there's
okay.
there's a decel lane coming into this site, and actually, there's more work that was recently done here, so the sidewalk from CarMax
Yep.
now extends across this area here.
Yep.
And so that entrance would stay and that exit would stay as they are, so
Okay, great.
no changes there.
Okay, okay. So, just building off of my colleague Patrick's comment regarding light, and I'll add to that potential noise disruption or any changes for the Walker Meadow residents. I'm curious to know the distance from that back property roughly to the kind of the parking lot. Do you have a sense of that, Randy? And if you don't, it's fine. I'm just.
Like from the back of the rail?
No, from the back of the, to the actual parking lot area of the
House,
proposed,
yeah.
from the house to the parking lot. You have-
I did not take that off, but that's 4 inches, so it's probably 160 feet,
Okay,
give or
okay.
take.
So just
And
given,
this is all wooded, obviously,
Right.
and then the rail bed is, raised probably 12 feet above the land next to it, but this is shown just as it is on Google Maps. It's
Sure.
all wooded today.
and I haven't walked through that area, but
Yep.
to my colleagues' comments, I would just want the planning board to be aware certainly of any light impact to that neighborhood or any neighborhood that's there, as well as to understand, I don't think it was in the packet, typical trip times for car carriers, like unloading, and again, the noise factor, I don't know how quietly those load or unload, but being that there's a residential area there, and CarMax is really sort of off further, and there's a greater
Yep.
buffer, I would want to understand that up front. Again, I
Yeah.
understand that.
Make sure everybody's not bringing all their vehicles at the same time.
Yeah,
The-
and,
you-
it's, I understand there's by right here, so,
Yeah.
but I just want that to be understood
Sure,
up
yep.
front.
Yeah, the one thing you'll see on a couple of the other dealers, certainly as you head a little further
Mhm.
east, is that their deliveries from their car carriers are out in Route 9 on the highway.
Yeah,
The beauty of this is that every car carrier will come
Yep.
off and get into the site before they unload. So there'll be no car carriers delivering or picking
which
up or
is,
anything.
right, which
on
is
it.
much safer
Yeah.
and all of that.
Yeah.
And so I guess I just would want the planning board to understand that,
Okay.
the timing of that. And just make sure. So, in the spirit of our friends here being from Florida and building off of Patrick's comments, we certainly can't ask you to do this specifically, but I would encourage you to really think about photovoltaic options with a cover for your cars on the top level. Hyundai certainly is in the spirit of building electric vehicles. It's part of your mission. And that's a lot of cars to uncover in the winter. So you cover them, you get the benefit of solar. I know that there's an upfront expense. It could be a showcase building that, hasn't been done. And, would
Okay.
be kind of interesting to have
Okay.
that on the rooftop. Again, can't compel that, but I think it would be nice. And I'm sure your salesman, my dad sold cars, and one of the things he never liked was to have to go and shovel them off in the winter. It's just not a favorite. So it might be
You'll deal with that
it
in
might be an
Florida.
attractive employee option. You don't have to shovel the cars there. So.
Okay, yeah, I know we hadn't discussed that, so
Yeah.
we'll have to see if
Well,
that's something
yeah,
that.
I
but we
just,
can-
for
yeah.
consideration,
Yeah.
and it's certainly in the spirit of
Yep.
the work that the town
Yep.
and residents and
Okay.
value. you may have mentioned, it's probably in the plan, how many parking spaces then total will be available, including the stacked?
In total on the whole project?
Yep.
435
Okay.
with the surface spaces, and, so there's 237 on the surface. These
Okay.
spaces are on the edge, and then 198 in the two decks, so 435 on the site, and there's 188 are required by code.
Okay, thank you.
So again, we're not counting the two decks to meet code, just because those spaces are slightly smaller than
Yeah,
the minimum
understood.
requirement, so.
Yep. Okay.
Actually, I have one follow-on question. It's actually something that's coming up next on our agenda too, but that's a lot of parking spaces, which is great. Some of our dealerships in town have auxiliary parking for overflow car deliveries. Is that something being considered here, or is the thought that you can keep, with the amount of space on the two decks, that all cars would be kept on site here?
Yeah, I don't think there's any
Yeah,
plan.
our objective, again, with the cost of the parking decks and things, was to keep everything on one site, to try and limit unnecessary activity outside of the site.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good answer. Yes. Any other questions from the board? If not, Christie, I saw you writing furiously, so I think you got the comments down that we will send off to the planning
Yep.
board? Perfect. So that's what our role here is. Thank you for coming. We'll put this into our comments, send it on to the planning board. You've heard them here. That's
Okay.
what will
Yep.
be in that letter. So you're getting the preview here, but we will pass that along to
Okay.
the planning
Appreciate
board
it.
for their review as well.
All
So
right.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for
Exciting
being
project.
here.
Thanks
Thank
for being here.
Welcome to Westboro.
Thank you.
Feels like Florida here today too, and it's 90 degrees.
I'm a little disappointed that it's not just a little cooler. I think it would actually be warmer here.
So you brought the hot, humid weather with you?
You can blame me.
Okay, next on our agenda is the request to amend the Class 1 dealer's license for John Ed Westboro Motor Cars LLC, which is the Nissan dealership. Perfect. And this is a follow-on from our last meeting. Christie, do you want to kick off anything here? So.
Sure. There were some concerns raised by the board at the last meeting, sort of three areas. One related to the term of the agreement being month to month. A second being the possible complication with zoning and related to the number of parking spaces that would be available for the tenants of that building. And then the third was the parking along Route 9. And so I did reach out to council, and I did provide you with some additional wording that could be added related to the month-to-month agreement. We have our zoning enforcement officer, Fred Leonardo, here, who can speak to any questions you have about zoning, but ultimately there's no concern here to approve the license in terms of what that might cause for zoning. And then the 23 spaces. So I have spoken with the attorney, and he did provide an update, which I did forward to the board today. So I'll let him present that as it stands.
Hi, good evening to everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for having me back again. As the town manager was just indicating, since last meeting, we've made some progress, I think, with respect to the first matter that was raised. We have reached an understanding with the landlord that the agreement would be amended so that it would run on a year-to-year basis. And that document is now in circulation. I'm waiting for signatures on that from the landlord. My client has already executed it, and I would suggest to you that I'll have that to be able to provide to the office before the end of this week. The issue of the location of vehicles being parked on site, we've explored that a little bit with the landlord as well. And the landlord is trying to be flexible, but if I don't know if you guys have the little plan that we had submitted. Yep. But the suggestion that I had made was that we would eliminate the spaces along what I would call the Route 9 frontage, the south side of the property in that area, and move them essentially to two locations. One would be on the east side of the building, which would be on the right of the building as you're looking at the plan. And then if you notice, there are a number of spaces left to the west of the building, very far side of the parking lot, which we were also considering. The landlord has indicated that with respect to the ones on the east, that would become a problem for them in terms of the use and convenience for their tenants that do use the building and are there on a day-to-day basis. So they're reluctant to do that. The question with regard to the west side is with respect to snow removal, and they have reached out to their contractor as to whether that would become a problem for snow storage and or removal. We had not, as of 5 o'clock tonight, I had not gotten an answer to that, but that it sounds to me as if that were not viable, that would be the reason, just because of the issue with snow. So that's the update I can give you. As I said, we're trying to be as flexible as possible. Just listening to the last presentation, I have the idea that maybe we'll do a deck. Maybe that's the answer here. But you know, and I was in contact a couple of times with the town manager, who did indicate to me that the question that was raised about the zoning seems to have been satisfactorily resolved, at least in the mind of the commissioner.
Great, thank you. Open up to the board for questions. Yeah.
I guess I'm curious to how the zoning question we had was resolved. I don't know if our zoning enforcement officer, director of community development.
So he's coming up, but I had indicated that to the applicant related to the response we got from town council, and then also the zoning enforcement officer's agreement with that. So, but Fred can speak to it.
Fred Lenaro, community development director. So I don't know if you've read council's response to your questions, but I'd be okay with their response. Basically, the parking spots exist, and it becomes an issue for the property owner. If they need the spots, they'd have to vacate the dealership, basically, is what it comes down to. So as far as the spots don't disappear, they're still there, so they meet the requirement of the zoning. I actually think the month-to-month was a better thing to get them out of there, but that's, again, it's up to the board. Basically, they can't just move their tenant off to another site. They'd have to be able to park them. Generally, my understanding is they don't need the spots because they're not parking people there. So the short answer is I don't have a problem with it. There was a third thing about signs. I'd be opposed to any signage out there. I don't know where that kind of came up in the conversation, but there shouldn't be any additional signs. And the intent would...
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was a discussion last time. It wasn't signage. And actually, if I understood it or remember correctly, while some of the language there said that they could show cars, that was not the intent. The intent is this is storage.
Mm-hmm.
If cars were to be shown, an employee would come over, move those cars over to the main lot, and that's where all of the customer interactions would take place, which I haven't seen anything that changes that, and I hope that would be still. And then, so from a signage, there'd be no need for signs over there. It really is truly a storage.
Right.
spot,
There
yeah.
shouldn't be sales coming off the lot. They shouldn't
Correct.
actually have sales staff, you know, office over there, blah, blah, blah. Then that changes the whole gamut of what you're talking about here. So that wasn't, my understanding, it's not the intent.
Yeah, that was our understanding as well. This was purely storage.
And we did add language to the motion to be clear about no signage on the auxiliary lot.
And I would just add, if I could, there remains in the agreement a 60-day provision, so that if the problem did arise with capacity in the building, the landlord rather, does have the ability to terminate that lease. So, you know, there's certainly a protection in that respect.
Great.
And that was the same as before, correct?
That is correct.
Other questions?
I guess only, not a question per se, but just as an issue for discussion among the board. At our last meeting, we discussed about having those 23 cars on Route 9, having that lot even without signage, look like a car dealership lot as opposed to an office building. And so knowing that, the building owner doesn't want those cars elsewhere, either for the convenience of the tenants or for snow, it sounds like snow removal would only be 11 or 12 spaces to shift anyways. I think the question is whether the 100 vehicles is acceptable, or we would limit it to 77 and not have the spaces facing Route 9 used for storage.
Can I have a related question when, sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt.
I'm just bringing it up for discussion among us to follow up our discussion from last week, last month.
So I have some questions regarding the number of parking spaces.
Okay.
So referring to our packet and to Mr. Riley, so on the western side, sort of near where I presume that's maybe I don't know what the green area is on the drawing, but it looks like you could potentially achieve about 8 additional spots. Does that sound right? If the landlord would allow that and snow was not an issue?
That would be 9 spaces. That's exactly the right area. Yes, that's what I was referring to.
Okay, so, and then when and again, I was just looking at it on the document, so my counting may be off, but the sections that are, as we're working closer toward the building, the row of 23, 7, and 15, and if the board wants to refer to those, when actually, I'm sorry, 7, 15, 7, and 23, when I went through those and just counted up how many spaces were there, the number of spaces doesn't seem to be accurate to what's on the drawing. And again, unless I counted wrong, but if we start toward the back of the lot, the number 7, that's sort of in the, this one right here, you guys, right here.
Yeah.
That looks like there are 6 spots there, not 7. Where it says 15, I counted 12. In the next 7, I counted 6, and in the row for 23, I counted 28. The net is the same in those for 52, but the drawing didn't seem to represent wasn't accurate. And again, I was only sort of counting boxes based on kind of this rough shading. So,
Well, actually, the numbers you're saying match the original markings on the drawing. So like next to the 15, there's the 15
I
in
didn't
blue, and
even
then there's
notice
a little
those.
12.
I didn't even notice
There
those.
as
So I guess, so if nothing else, I would like clarification as to what are the right numbers that are.
The right numbers, that was, shame on me. I did not do well in math at school. So when I originally submitted the drawing, I added up all the numbers and they added up to 100, but then you're quite correct that if you count the spaces themselves, they didn't add up to 100. So you'll see, hopefully you have the amended plan, which does have my scribbles on it, which is circles with the correct numbers in it. So it would be starting from the top, 12, 7, 29, 6, 12, 6, and 28.
Okay, we do see that they're not in circles on our drawing, but they are near the shaded area. So thank you for that clarification.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So Alan, to your question and our discussion, I guess I would love to understand the answer regarding the snow removal to see if, 9 spaces can be moved. 28 spaces along the front of there, to me, I don't know if the cars are going to be wrapped or what they're going to look like. To me, it's going to look like an off-site parking. And
If I may, so I just driving by the other day, and I realized the last time we met, there was a fair discussion around kind of the look from Route 9. I was actually pretty surprised. You cannot see that parking lot.
Correct.
From Route 9. It is completely hidden behind trees.
If you look at our package too, it's way off the road.
It's way off the road, and there are a lot of tall trees. I was really surprised. It's not like it's right on Route 9 and you can see it. I mean, I suppose the landowner could come in and clear that land at some point, but
This is where the parking is.
so I just thinking through it, I'm less concerned about the 23 than I was a few weeks, 28 now, than I was a few weeks ago.
That was my understanding, that there was some cover as between the highway and the property. And I would tell you also that I think that, judging by the displays at other dealerships, the only thing that you would see is vehicles which don't have license plates on them.
Right.
That's the only thing that would tell you that they're not somehow related to tenants in the office space. They'll not be wrapped, or, there'll be no pennants or streamers or anything like that on them to indicate that, they're vehicles for sale.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. That was going to be my comment. I did the same thing, and it's protected from the road. I appreciate all the work you've done since the last time and working with the landowner. It still may be that some of these are moved. I am, also not concerned. In some ways, having this be storage, I think, for the property owner too, it makes the business, the office building look like it's more populated, which is probably a good thing as well. So personally, I just want to say thank you for the work that you've done, listening to us as a board. But personally, for me as a board member, I'm comfortable with the wording we have from legal and how this is presented right now.
Would you like a motion?
I would love a motion.
Well, actually, I just had a quick question on the motion, as written, just about the last sentence. Let me get to it here real quick. So it says, just starting there, and community development memorandum dated 6/28/2022, that vehicles are not parked on both sides of Indian Meadow Road. Vehicles to me is really broad. I'm wondering if that should be inventory vehicles. Because I think what we're trying to prevent is the parking of non-licensed vehicles on the road there.
No, it's parking on both sides of the road for access to the road. That's employees park.
Okay.
It appears that employees and even some customers might park on Indian Meadow. They're marked spaces for parking on the northbound side of the road, but not the south.
So
they're saying if cars were parked on both sides of Indian Meadow Road, it would be hard for traffic to get through.
Okay, so we're saying,
No
we're
cars
not
for
saying
sale
don't
should
park
be on
on
there.
both sides. We're saying you can park on one side but not on the other. That's essentially what we're trying to say here.
And no cars for sale can be on that road.
Because they're not licensed.
Then I would suggest that we change that the vehicles are only enabled to be parked on the marked side of the road or something to that effect. Because the way it's written right now, it says to me that there's no vehicles allowed on either side of the road.
I agree.
Okay.
So if you want to make
a motion?
Okay.
Try it?
So move to approve the request by John Ed Westboro Motors LLC, DBA Route 9 Nissan at 273 Turnpike Road to amend the conditions and restrictions as stated on its Class 1 dealer's license to authorizing them to park no more than 100 vehicles on the auxiliary parcel identified as 287 Turnpike Road, provided that the licensee has legal access and rights to occupy said parcel, and conditioned on the following. No signage may be placed on the auxiliary lot. Conservation Commission Director Memorandum dated 6/22/22 that vehicles will only be parked on the pavement and not on any grassy surfaces. And the Community Development Memorandum dated 6/28/2022 that vehicles are only parked on the northbound side of Indian Meadow Road.
Second?
So just for clarification,
Yes.
the vehicles, I still feel like the motion is vague as it relates to inventory vehicles on Indian Meadow Road.
It can't be. It'd be illegal.
It's illegal. You can't park them there, right?
Because they don't have license plates on them.
They
That's
can't
what
be parked on the
they can't be
street at
parked
all.
on the street.
Oh, okay, thank you for, okay, got it.
The only question, and I'm fine with the motion, but I guess I'm going to look, it's talking about a community development memorandum, and I'm assuming that the memorandum said that they can't be parked on both sides. Is there any issue, do you think, with changing it? Because that's not how it's written in the memorandum.
I mean, as long as Fred feels like.
Are you okay with that?
So, just to be clear, for Leonardo again, we don't want parking on both sides of Indian Meadow, whether they're used, new, anything else. And that was the issue when, with the two car dealerships, when they first moved in, especially Nissan. They were parking on both sides of Indian Meadow.
And that's, I think, why you use the word both rather than either, so that it's not one or the other, it's both at the same time.
Yeah, they can't be both at the same time. So on the I guess would be the northern side, the easterly side, whatever side you want to look at, Indian Meadow Road has designated parking spots now, and they're actually labeled Indian Meadow. Those should be the only spots that are occupied by any type of vehicle.
Okay, and that's what we just put in the motion. So it sounds like you're okay with that.
I'm absolutely okay with that.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
So do you want it to say marked
You could
parking
say marked.
spaces?
Yes, we can say on the marked spaces on Indian Meadow
Sheila,
Road.
can you get that?
So we're taking out northbound and putting in marked spaces?
Mark spaces on mark spaces on Indian Meadow
Instead of
Road.
northbound.
Yeah, that may be better actually, because there's, as you approach the intersection for Route 9, you actually don't want it to encroach on that area, and those are not marked, if I recall.
Right.
Okay,
So that would be a great suggestion. Thank you.
perfect. Okay. Moved and second. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? It's 5-0, five being present, so we're good to go. Thank you. And
Thank you very much. And
you'll be sending the agreement, it sounds like, by the end of the week, so we appreciate that once it's fully executed.
We'll send it in, absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for all the work you've done.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate your time and consideration.
Okay, next on the agenda, way behind schedule here, but a public health update and with the public health nurse. Welcome.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jim Frederick. I'm a public health nurse here in Westboro, new to the town. So we have a couple of updates for you. One is some home wellness visits. The Greater Boroughs Health Alliance, which is what I'm part of, we've strived to help seniors keep their independence through their health and well-being. We've assessed their needs by having the seniors tell us what their needs are instead of telling them what they need. We look at medications, home safety, resources, and ways to stay healthier. At this time, there's been 15 home visits identified by the Senior Center in talking with seniors. We've started to distribute cards that will allow them to call when they're ready for us to come assist them. Other things that have been going on are blood pressure clinics. They're held during the first week of the month. They can flex on time and day depending on senior activities and planned trips. We visit 2 to 3 senior facilities that the Senior Center suggests, average 7 to 12 people per clinic, depending on senior activities. Another popular thing that we've done is a falls clinic. In May, we held our first falls clinic. We use what they call the STEADY program. It's stopping elderly accidents, deaths, and injuries. It's by the CDC. To evaluate the fall risk of our seniors, the CDC has an assessment sheet to follow for the evaluation for each senior by assessing balance, strength, and blood pressure in lying standing positions. We had 32 seniors evaluated by 4 nurses, then triaged to specialists that we had there. We had podiatry, physical therapy, optometry, and a pharmacist. 7 seniors now are followed up with podiatry on a regular basis, and 12 of the seniors are followed up with physical therapy as needed to keep their strength and balance up. The seniors have asked for another fall clinic to be scheduled to have their friends evaluated. We're looking at September to do another one for the seniors. We're also looking to schedule a brown bag event in September. This will be by appointments to meet with the pharmacist. They can bring all the medications in their bags and be able to address what concerns they have. At the same time, being able to address any end-of-life questions in a MOLST form, which is created by the state of Mass, which is called the Medical Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. This allows the seniors to choose what they want for end-of-life measures. So being there to help assist them to make the choices that they want. And so COVID-19, the health department has held COVID-19 booster clinics through the beginning of July. At the scheduled booster clinic that we had for July, we delivered 0 doses. Nobody picked up any appointments. We are suspending our clinics as of right now, and we'll continue to monitor case trends in other clinics as needed. As for monkeypox, we have approximately 58 positive cases here in Massachusetts. We have had 1 close contact where we're required to monitor by the state. The patient has remained symptom-free and has been released from the Board of Health after the period of time now. Our last on the list is our vaccine for children. The state has free vaccines for all children that are required under the age of 18. Judy Noonan, the head school nurse, approached the health department about having clinics for the school kids. After a lengthy process, we held our first clinic in May. We had 7 out of 10 kids show up as scheduled. They got their vaccines. At this time, prior to school starting in the fall of 2022, Ms. Noonan will compose a list for those who need vaccines for the preschool year. And as of right now, for the 19 days of July, we've had approximately 90 cases for COVID, which is approximately 4.7 cases per day and 33.1 cases per week. And that's what I have for an update for now.
Great. Well, welcome, thank you. Any questions?
Just one quick question.
Sure.
The home visit program,
Yes, sir.
is that specifically geared for the elderly, or could it also accommodate people with chronic illness that might be somewhat homebound?
It can accommodate actually all, because there are people that have children that have special needs too, and there are certain things that we can help and assist in looking at resources and things like that to be able to help them.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
Okay.
Shelby?
Yeah, so as a follow-on to Alan's question, how would those individuals be identified who are not referred by the senior center, or how would they self-identify?
So down in my office now, I have cards, and actually what I'd like to try to do is try to place them in different offices here that people can see them, and then have the ability to take one, and then we have a number on the back that they can call to schedule a visit.
I would suggest maybe putting it in the library too is always a good place to see if they can.
Yeah, and the
post it.
Department of
good.
Youth and Family Services as well.
Right.
Yeah, actually, we've been in touch with youth and family a little bit, helping especially with senior stuff for like depression and anxiety and stuff too, so.
Perfect.
The school department and the borough program might be another location for those cards.
Yes, actually, the 4 towns that are involved in the greater boroughs, which is Northborough, Southborough, Westboro, and Boylston, all the cards are pretty much dispersed between all of the 4 towns. So it's kind of reaching out to everybody. So in case someone works in another town, they have the ability, they go in someplace, they'll be able to see one of those cards also and grab it.
Perfect.
One more question. Can you detail out a little bit more on the MOLST initiative? I'm familiar with what MOLST is, but I missed what the actual action or
So a
plan
lot of
is.
seniors go to their PCPs, and now with the primary care physicians, they have a lot of decreased time, restraints of like 15 minutes for their visits. They don't get a lot of these explanations. So our opportunity was to reach out to seniors and help them and ask any questions, and be able to fill out the forms, assist so that they can take it to their primary care, then to have it signed to make it legal.
And so that's being done at the senior center, like
yes.
a specific program? I guess I'm just not.
The brown bag event is where we're going to really hit it, because that's
okay.
talking about their medications.
Okay.
And that'll be in September. We just don't have a positive date yet.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate
Thank
you.
you, folks.
Thanks for all your work. Okay, next on the agenda is a cultural council request to install a bench at Bay State Commons.
Hi,
Hello.
I'm Bethita Schumann, 21 Bayard Lane, and I'm here tonight to ask if it would be something that would be acceptable to have a memorial bench for Lynn Watts, who is the person who originally came up with the idea for Arts in Common. Other people worked on it, of course, but it was originally Lynn's idea. And when Lynn passed away in February of this year, she requested that donations in her memory be given to the Cultural Council. So we do have some funding of our own, and I thought that a bench at Bay State Commons, where Cultural Council puts on Arts in Common, would be the most appropriate. Since I sent you the letter and the pictures of benches, I have also looked into the benches that are already at the Bay State Commons. And so I will include that in my request. The benches that I've chosen are probably not as sturdy as the ones that you have at Bay State Commons now. And although I prefer the ones that I chose because they're a little prettier, we want it to last. So I want to include that in the request. That is another thing that if that is a concern. As to where it would be, any space that you have, I think we see at Arts and Common, there are a lot of people, and there's not enough places for them to sit, so people sit on the ground. So another bench would certainly be used.
Yep. Perfect. Any questions folks have?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you so much for bringing this forward. I think it's a great idea. I'm really happy to hear that the style of the bench, you're willing to consider one that aligns with what's already there. I think those benches have proven to be very durable, and so I would be in support of that style bench for its durability and uniformity of down there at Bay State. As for location, one thing certainly I've noticed during events, and not just, I'm thinking more just the block party recently, is that sort of front area as we leave the grass and go onto the hardscape facing the pavilion, that it's where a lot of seniors sit and they have to lug a chair, if they have a rollator, they have a place to sit. But, I could envision benches along there, facing that. One bench is going to look maybe awkward at first, but maybe there could be a larger plan for some seating there that would potentially obstruct the view for those on the lawn, so maybe they're on the ends. But I just I don't know where there are other locations available presently. So I would just ask that might be consideration, something where folks can kind of enjoy other aspects of the area, not just the green space.
Correct.
And I know Jen Kirkland is coming up behind us. Or behind you to talk about the splash pad, and maybe there's an opportunity there for that bench to be beneficial to that area. So maybe there can be some collaboration with recreation.
The only thing that I would request is that I still be allowed to put the plaque that says.
Yeah, no, I think there are
memorial plaque.
Yeah, there are
Absolutely.
other plaques, and if you're selecting the one that looks like the benches down there, they have other plaques on there. I know dedications and, from the Civic Club, et cetera. So I think that they can accommodate that on the back.
Great.
I think in our motion too, I think we'd put it in the, kind of under the direction of the Department of Public Works for the Parks Department that kind of understands the area and the benches and has worked through it before. So I think putting that in and giving the suggestions, I think is great, but allowing, them through the DPW, as the motion says, I think is good to work with you, but to also find those appropriate spots that work for.
And we would need, obviously, some help with the installation of that.
Yep, and I think,
Yeah, so I've reached out to the DPW director and I forwarded the materials, so he's aware. And he's already designated Earl Story to be your point of contact.
Yep.
Wonderful.
You got the right person.
Good.
Is there a motion?
I just had a quick comment. I'll just say I want to thank both of you for bringing this forward. I didn't know Lynn Watts personally, and from what I've learned about her since Bethita first talked to me about this, it's really encouraging to see the recognition of her. So I appreciate that you bring this forward, Bethita.
Thank you.
Just wanted to note also in your packet, depending, I guess, on the location, if it was to be placed on a grassy area, the DPW so that they could pay for the installation of a cement pad if that's needed. It sounds like we might have opportunity to not need it.
Yep.
So
Right. That's great.
I'll make a motion. Sure.
Okay.
I'll move to approve the request of the Westboro Cultural Council to install a bench at the direction of the Department of Public Works on Bay State Common in connection with their annual Arts in Common event and dedicated to one of the event's founders.
Is there a second?
Second. I'm wondering if we can amend the motion and put Lynn's name in the motion. Would it be fine if we?
Yes.
Dedicated to one of the, okay, so event and dedicated to Lynn Watts, one of the event's original founders.
Second.
Very
Perfect. Any further comments? Okay, all those in favor? It's 5-0, 5 being present.
Thank you very much.
Bethita, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, it shall be mentioned, the next item on our agenda is ARPA funding award. The first one is the public radio infrastructure. Did he leave us?
I can speak to it.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
on May 31st, we had the joint meeting with the Advisory Finance Committee to discuss potential awards for ARPA funding. Our process, just as a reminder, was for the finance team to make recommendations to the Advisory Finance Committee, who would then make recommendations to the board, and then the board was voting to award. And so at that meeting on the 31st, that we had gone through that process with a cost estimate for the public radio infrastructure of about $94,000. And then it was at that meeting that we learned that the price, they sort of adjusted the scope of the project based on some incidences that had happened, and so the price about doubled. Because that additional cost, the additional approximately $90,000, hadn't come through that same process, the board did award that the first half, and then waited for the recommendations from both the finance team and the finance committee to get us to tonight to award the second half for that project. So the chief did present the full project to this board and the advisory finance committee at the time. We took it back to our finance team meeting. It was then brought to the advisory finance committee meeting on June 30th, where they voted to recommend it to you. And so as part of the process, you would vote, consider voting to award that balance.
Okay, so I'm going to take these separately, but so is there any questions? And if not, I'd look for a motion, but open up for questions first. No.
So I would move to award an additional $91,705 to the fire department for the purpose of public radio infrastructure.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? It's 5-0, 5 being present. So Jen, you're anxious, now's your chance.
I just one slide, maybe, sorry. I don't want to prolong anything. Nothing earth-shattering.
Should be all good on the projectors.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Hi, is this on? Hi, I'm Jen Kirkland. I'm the Recreation Director. Just back to talk a little bit more about the splash pad. So thank you for having me back. I have quite a bit more information that hopefully will be able to move this project forward. So just to kind of recap, a splash pad is a facility for users to cool off during the hot summer months. The facility is intended for anyone, but the main users are kids ages 12 and younger. When I proposed this project, I was being very sensitive to the cost of the project. So therefore, this proposal is only for a splash pad. It doesn't include any additional seating, shading, or any other, landscaping. This area is already well developed, which was what attracted me to propose to put the splash pad there. There are already many amenities, as there's already some seating, there are some benches, and there is that stage and pavilion that does provide a considerable amount of shade already. My intention too with this proposal was not to change the aesthetic at all of the existing facility. So just some highlights here. So again, a splash pad is a safe aquatic facility with no drowning risks. Splash pads are basically self-operational. There's no need for additional staff. At the beginning of the season, I spoke with the Board of Health, and what happens is they'll come out, they'll inspect the facility. They'll also run weekly tests to ensure the chemicals are balanced. Splash pads do not require any additional cleaning outside of anything like vandalism, things like that. Splash pads are basically treated like playgrounds. Splash pads are set on a timer to turn on and off at certain times. A timer is set for a system to start up in the morning and then power down at night. On a rainy day, you wouldn't need someone to go out there and turn off the splash pad, as the features only come on if they're activated by motion. The splash pad uses recirculated water. This eliminates water waste. The water is sprayed out and then is recirculated back through the system and is treated with chemicals, much like a swimming pool. In only very, very extreme circumstances would you ever be required to refill the tank during the season. At the end of the season, the splash pad is winterized and then blown out, similar to an irrigation system. I have a quote from our vendor, which is on the next slide. He's been out to the property. He's met with some members of the DPW and also the planning department. So I feel that this is an accurate representation of what we can expect to receive for this price. So that was sort of my spiel. I don't know, I'm happy to answer any questions. I also have a couple of drawings here. This is, you know, kind of the size of what we're looking at. The total area is 2,500 square feet. The spray area would be just under 1,600. Again, this is conceptual design. Things can be tweaked, moved around, but our vendor has done a lot of work to kind of get us to this point. So again, any questions? Happy to answer.
Patrick?
I just want to know when can you install it, like this week?
I know.
You know?
Yesterday?
That'd be good, right? I know you hear on the news all the splash pads that are open. I'm like, that'll be us next year, hopefully.
Yeah, no, this is great. I'm just thinking, you know, if it's open in the evenings, the board could get down there and we could, you know, jump in the bed.
It's got to make these
She said
meetings,
all
got to
ages.
make
She
make
did
these
say all ages.
make the meetings go faster.
It is all ages, yeah.
Absolutely. That'll be our incentive.
You just have the meeting there.
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go.
In the splash pad. Okay.
Oh, and I should note too that since I last spoke with you, I did apply and submit for the park grant. So just waiting on, you know, they'll announce the award winners in the fall. So, but that has been submitted for and applied for.
But that's for the balance.
Yeah, for
right?
the 100,000.
Right.
Yes.
So it would be in addition to the full amount that she's asking for ARPA funding.
Yeah.
And I think in our notes here, this one went to Finance Committee as well in their recommendation. That's in front of us as a recommendation to award. Questions, or is there a motion?
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Jen, thanks so much for this additional information, both in our packet and additionally here. I guess these are just more, I'm fully supportive of this. You saw that in the email. But I did want to share my comments with you and the board and the public. I think that I appreciate if you will, the conservative nature of sort of let's get the pad in and get going. But I feel like if we're going to do this project, and we're going to disrupt the area, and you know we have to excavate. And if we were, I think it's the best opportunity to kind of go all in and put in some any necessary shading, hardscaping, and landscaping, because that's a really hot area. And yes, the pavilion provides some sun and shade, but it's not, you know, I would say it's not sort of ideal for families. So I guess I would, I don't know the best way to do this, but I'm supportive of moving forward with ARPA, but I guess I would ask you to think about, as we look forward to maybe fall town meeting, you know, are there any other, I saw a shake of the head. Oh. It's like I have great peripheral vision. You know, I just think that if we're going to do this project, we should do it completely and not then try to, you know, add and put in footings later on and have that be disruptive. And I do think shade is really important. I think it's missing from the original tot lot design. So I think it would be an enhancement, not a detraction. So that would be my first kind of comment, and I would love your thoughts.
Sure. So I was able to speak with our sales rep about shade, because I do hear, you know, that is a concern. It's just an extra cost, a very big one. So he gave me a range. If you wanted a fabric shade structure, you're anywhere from $7,000 to $25,000 install. If you wanted hardscape shade, he said to quadruple that to be safe. So it adds a significant expense onto the project.
To Shelby's point, we did view it similar to the tot lot where, and we did talk about this, but where, you know, the creation of the tot lot creates a similar space for a similar audience, but didn't include sort of all of the benches and the shading. So I understand what you're saying, that you feel like that was missing also from the tot lot, but this was sort of similar in terms of scope of project.
You know, and I understand why we wouldn't necessarily want to do natural shading with trees, because that will get on the, you know, the
less debris, the better.
Yeah, the surface and clog up things. So, I mean, I think that the right way to do that would be, you know, kind of posts and fabric. And while it's not inexpensive, if it's durable, you know, this is an investment in our future, and that would be an expensive amount for my backyard, but for a town, you know, project, I don't know, that doesn't seem unreasonable. So I would just ask that be considered. The other thing I would just ask to think about, and certainly not relevant to this approval, I mentioned like the bathrooms. I know we have like a porta potty on site, but I really think that if we're gonna have a splash pad there, and I know this is down the road, we have to think about really opening up those bathrooms so that they're open on a regular basis, because people are going to want to change, and I think it's just an amenity we have to anticipate for use and the time and materials and labor to maintain those. So I just put that out there for future thought and consideration.
I'd say that your point about the bathrooms is well taken. You know, we certainly have that there, and we want to be able to use it. So I think that makes a lot of sense to think about how we can use that better. If we were to move forward, just based on, I'm just hearing the numbers now for you know, potential shading or anything, that would certainly have to go through the capital planning process, because we wouldn't have enough money in ARPA funding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments?
I do have one more, sorry.
Okay.
The parking piece, Christy, I think that you answered this through the emails, but can you just clarify, because this was a discussion we had when we all met, and that I think it's going to attract a lot of people. I think a lot of people will walk, which is great. Maybe they'll bike, but have we anticipated kind of how parking will be handled? And I know the downtown parking study says we have ample parking, so maybe it's not an issue.
I just compare, I think Basic Common does host many well-attended events. Most recently, the block party. It's up for debate if that was our most, you know, popular.
It's awesome.
And I hear a lot of things about events that are held in there, and parking just doesn't come up as a problem. So obviously, we would not have as many people at the block as that we had the block party at the splash pad. And as Christy maybe had mentioned, there are 20 dedicated spaces around the common that are for municipal use. And I just think people find a place to park. There's, you know, a lot of parking between Tavolino's, Panera, a lot of spaces back there, even if people do have to walk a little bit. I think people just expect it. So that's sort of my theory on it. I just, like, not even the block party, but we do Screen on the Green, concerts, Arts in Common, Spring Fest, Fall Fest. And I just think people find a place to park. And it won't be, I think people will come, it'll vary. People will come, you know, in the morning, maybe afternoon, at night. So I don't think it'll be an influx of people all trying to park at the same time. That's my thoughts.
We may, as a courtesy to key businesses in the area, want to give them a heads up to this project. I mean, certainly these are public meetings and they can be watching them, but we may want to just give them a heads up that work is, you know, if this goes forward.
Definitely.
Thank you, Ian.
Yep, no problem. Any other comments or questions? Anybody want to make a motion?
So I move to award an additional $275,000 to the Recreation Department for the purpose of building a splash pad.
Second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Thank you.
Great.
Congratulations. Okay, next on the agenda is the Hockomock Pond Reuse Committee presentation.
Yeah.
I'm presenting, so I'll go up here.
Okay.
That's all right. I mean,
Yep.
is that easier?
Step down for a second.
Can you hit the
Chief, I know you came back in. We voted in favor of your article before you, while you left, so. Yeah. Just want to give you the heads up. You're all set.
Shelby, you're going to educate us on how to properly say this, right?
The term is reuse, not reuse.
Like Chungamunga or whatever that is, right? This is not the one.
Reuse, it's a good one. It's a good one.
Hey, you guys are a good-looking group from here.
She's asking
Get those
for
glasses checked.
Oh, okay. All right. Ooh. Oop. That's even harder to say. Okay, well, Christy's getting that queued up. I will get this started. So first of all, thank you to the board for allowing this presentation this evening. I am here representing the Hockomock Pond Reuse Committee. I am chair of the committee. I'm pleased to see some of my fellow committee members here in the audience. The board will recall, and this presentation is also in your packet. It's unchanged, so you can follow along there. But for the public, I should probably pause so that they can see it.
Exit presentation mode in PowerPoint and turn off presenter view.
And then go back, put it.
Slideshow setup.
Just,
Now, what do I do now?
if you just go down to the right there, Kirsty, by where the Zoom, and just up, nope, one to the right.
Click on slideshow.
Yep, right there. That should, oh,
Yeah,
God.
But because
So-
she's in Zoom, it automatically.
Oh,
puts us into
she's in
this.
Zoom. What do I know?
So,
You know what, this is fine. Don't worry about it,
yeah.
if you
I can
can't.
read it. I can read it.
Just when you thought you were getting on track, Ian, I'm sorry.
Well, just blame you.
Okay, we'll continue. Okay, so as the board is aware, the Hockomock Pond Reuse Committee is charged with making recommendations to the select board on the future use and redevelopment of this parcel. We're an 11-member committee. They are listed here, and they represent various committees and departments across town operations. Not listed here is our public safety official. That was Jason. He's obviously no longer here, so we're waiting for an appointment. I also want to acknowledge that our conservation director, Sherry Wittes, has been extremely helpful to the committee and attends the meetings, even though she's not a voting member. Next slide, if you can. Okay, so just for background, the Hockomock Pond parcel is located at 30 Otis Street. It is the location of a former creosote wood treatment facility. And this long-term use completely contaminated the property. Thank you, Christy. Next slide, there you go, okay. As a result of that, it was listed in 1983 as a priority and a Superfund site. From that time to 2019, it underwent ongoing remediation for groundwater contamination. So in 2017, the town entered into an agreement. It's called the NAUL, which stands for Notice of Activity Use Limitation. And it was signed by us, the DEP, or Department of Environmental Protection, and the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. With the signing, the town took ownership of the property and control effectively. The NAUL describes specific and non-specific future uses for the parcel. So it's, as you might imagine, it's appropriately vague and very technical and leaves lots of questions. The site itself is sort of in a, I'll call it sort of a new natural state. With the groundwater remediation system, so if you imagine this is a really contaminated site, they had to bring in lots of equipment, actually had to build a facility to remediate the site. That has all been decommissioned, and the building that sits there today is just literally a shell with not a whole lot. And So next slide, please. So this is an area map. You're going to see two. The purpose of this is to give you and the public a sort of a broader view of where the property sits. If you can see their outline in red, that is the area, the property, demarks the property lines roughly through, as close as we could through the red lining of what the town actually owns. You'll see to the east, that Otis Street borders the property, to the southeast, Smith Valve Parkway, and then as you continue along Fisher Street, picks up there, and the water treatment plant is sort of heading, I guess that would be northwest. Christy, if you could just go back, please, for a moment. I also point out here that this parcel is located in an area of a lot of mixed use. We have manufacturing and industrial, we have commercial and retail, and we have significant residential locations. Park Village is just to the north there. We have the Target baseball fields, and obviously the transit-oriented village and lots of residences along Fisher. So it's a very kind of interesting area, and of course the T station. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a slightly closer view, and I provided this to point out the areas of sort of, if you will, greatest concern that we have to be aware of. And they're referred to in the NAUL as Area B. And they are the lagoon and landfill. And so you see the yellow arrows pointed to that. They look sort of like barren land, which they are. They have to be maintained, and you can't, there's a membrane. Andy could describe those in much greater detail because he's our technical guy, but they can't be punctured, basically. You'll see the building there, and then the entrance at this time is a gated entrance from Otis Street. I would also point out that the committee envisions, and one of the recommendations I'll talk to you about in just a few minutes that we've spent a lot of time talking about, is this idea of passive recreation as a primary preliminary use. That would envision, through the cooperation of the neighbors to the north at 50 Otis Street, a looped path. So that would require some easements, and those discussions have started with the property owners of Otis. But there actually is, from the former, because we've gone out and walked the trail, it's pretty interesting that even though it's very wooded on that northern side, there's actually a trail that you can follow. So with some maybe minor improvements, working with a land trust or some scouts or what have you, it could be a really attractive area, but I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. Next slide, please. Okay, so so for the board's benefit, I just wanted to, the purpose of this slide is really to summarize our work so far. So we've reviewed the NAUL in depth. We've had meetings with both DEP and EPA and Beazer. East Beazer is the entity that continues to monitor the ground water through what are called test pits, or they're like tubes. We've done site walks, we've done a building tour, and that included invitations to committee and town departments. Through Christie, we solicited just a preliminary ask from town departments as to how the building itself or the property could be used, but the question was primarily focused on the building, so we do have that information. And through our discussions, we've sort of addressed we've discussed, immediate needs and responsibilities of the town as it relates to the site as it is right now. So I failed to mention that it is a fenced-in entity, so the fence runs all along Otis, continues down Smith Valve Parkway, and then continues into the property. So it is a contained area, and so it is secure at this time. We have created an extensive list of questions through participation of the committee, certainly, and our conservation director. And we prepared those for a licensed site professional, and through our work as a board, you're familiar with tie and bond, and we provided that list of questions to them just to get a sense from them, and we'll talk about it in the next slide here, what it would cost for them to help us to further explore potential uses. Next slide. So, sorry, wrong slide. So the committee's primary concerns and where we continue to circle, and when I say that, it's not an exaggeration in our discussions, is what can we do in the restricted area A, which is really the entirety of the property, that also is inclusive of the lagoon and landfill? And what are the responsibilities of the town to protect Area B, lagoon and landfill, in such a way that we would not compromise what's called the selected remedy? All these terms come from the NAUL. So meaning, in simple terms, if we were to use the site in a more public way and it were to be more open, we want to make sure we don't damage the membrane, as I mentioned before, and therefore really impact and cause great risk and liability to the town. So those are really where we focused our discussions. And to say that it sometimes has felt like a dog chasing its tail is not an exaggeration. Next slide. So at this point, the committee, this is where we're at in really the crux of the presentation to this board. So our view is that we think it's important that the community be allowed to experience the space in kind of a passive way, and ultimately from there gain further input from the community of, geez, this is really nice, we could use this here, or maybe it's just really good for passive recreation. Solar has been discussed as one of the areas. Could you put solar on top of those protected areas? Other Superfund sites have done that kind of work. So there are a lot of potential uses, but again, we have to kind of think about risk and liability. We would recommend that potentially once that the space is open, that the committee be reconvened to then contemplate future uses at whatever point in time. But before we can do any of that, we really need to hire an LSP because they've got to give us some answers, and that really is the question to this board where we're looking for the board's support. So the purpose would be to hire an LSP to review that extensive list of questions, which I'm happy to provide to the board if you're so interested to read them, to review the current site conditions and restrictions. It would, among other things, identify the details of the site, the limits of the AUL areas, and obtain answers to those questions. It would also then give us a sense of what additional costs might be incurred should other LSP services be needed for any sort of engineering. And I use it's a dirt road going in. So before we could even scrape the ground and disturb the soil, if we needed to put, let's say, asphalt down, just as an example, we need to understand, can that be done? And certainly, is there any violation or impact to the NAUL? And again, just as an example, we also want to understand certainly the water quality, right? What can be done there, what can't be done, and what is the risk to the town? The initial cost to work with the LSP is $2,800. That's a firm number that our conservation director has obtained from Ty and Bond. And then we would bring back, if the board is supportive of this, we would bring back the reuse recommendations based on the LSP findings that the committee then recommends. And looking ahead beyond this presentation, this is sort of a very rough timeline of what we'd be looking at. So we're presenting here tonight. We estimate Time Bomb will take a handful of weeks to do their work. We would then meet with the LSP to review their findings. They've agreed to one meeting as part of that proposal. And we would develop a comprehensive list of reuse priorities and goals that would then come back, presumably to the select board for review after we've had public presentations and provided some input and sought some other thoughts, including potentially including to capital planning, because this would need to potentially go on that project list if, additional fencing or whatever other work may need to be required. And then, again, looking forward into 2024, 2023, annual town meeting, because my date's messed up, if an article were needed. So that gives you a sense of the timeline.
Great.
Okay.
So
Yes.
the question, the $2,800 on the prior slide, is that money that we have available to use? So you guys are already moving forward with that, or you need approval, or what is the funding source?
So we've talked about because it's such a small number, we could potentially do it in budget, but also the chair of the Open Space Committee has suggested that they might have funding. So I know they were going to take that up at a future meeting. But we feel like we could handle it in budget.
Okay, so do we need any, sounds like it's in budget or through them, so it's really not a vote for us as a board?
No, I mean, no.
Really
Okay.
looking for kind of support to move forward with that, but not necessarily a vote.
Right, because this is not anticipated. We would want to make sure that the board is supportive of the direction.
Yep. I'll start off and then turn to the board, and I think this is great. Thanks for bringing this forward. Thank you to the committee, those that are here, and the others. I'm fully supportive. I mean, this is been a long time coming. Let's continue to move it forward. I think what you've put out there totally makes sense. Get the questions answered. So I am fully supportive. Happy that we can find the money to pay for it, and so personally, I'd love to see it move forward. So I'd turn to other board members for any comments or if anybody has any concerns.
I'll just add that I like the approach, which appears to be as quickly as we can safely make it available for public use. Passive recreation, which makes it available to the public, at which time we can then think about other uses or further uses down the road, but not keeping it behind lock and key until we come up with a final decision. Because it is a beautiful site.
It really is. There's some amazing wildlife over there. We actually, Westboro TV was great at providing the committee with some amazing drone footage, which happy to share with the board at any time. But there are some heron nests that are there, which when you walk around to the other side, there are actually some viewing areas. So it really could be a really kind of a beautiful site. And the water doesn't glow. So I wouldn't drink it, but it doesn't glow. So.
No, Shelby, thank you very much. I totally agree with this, but I do realize there are risks associated with this site, and that's just what we need to understand what those are, right, before we move forward. So, 100% agreement. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a very conservative, but progress-oriented approach.
I'll just say that I'm excited that the town is willing to take this on. I mean, obviously, this has been a Superfund site, which is, a difficult piece of property to deal with, and I'm certainly encouraged by the conversations that Hockomock Pond Reuse Committee has gone through over the last several months, and appreciate Shelby corralling us and keeping us focused, and then obviously pulling together this slide deck to share with the board. It is a very unique piece of property. It's exciting to see that the connectivity that we can build. When I think about what's going to happen potentially with the Otis Street connection out on Route 9, the sidewalks that are going to be redesigned, and the walking potential back and forth between all of those various different residential properties and commercial properties, there's just some really great potential there. So I'm really looking forward to continuing this process.
It's to Alan's point, and Patrick, to your point, I think it has the potential to be a beautiful addition to a side of town that doesn't necessarily have sort of lots of open space. And
Yeah, and I would just say, the other thing, you described it as a former creosote wood treatment facility. My understanding is they were basically dipping telephone poles in tar there, right?
Yes.
Is
Yep.
basically what it
Yes.
was,
Yes.
right? Yeah, I mean,
In open pits.
just to be more, yeah,
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
crazy.
okay.
Awesome.
All right, I want to
I
thank
think you
again the
got the
committee.
support
and-
here. I didn't hear
Great.
anybody said no, so.
Okay, thank you so much.
Go forth.
Great, thanks.
Okay, next on the agenda is conveying the property at 3 Baylor Avenue to the Westboro Affordable Housing Trust. And who,
Just pulling it up again. So as the board's aware, at town meeting, the town meeting voted to authorize the board to convey the property to the Westboro Affordable Housing Trust. So town council did draw up the deed. It would be for, I believe it's $48,000, which is the taxes owed, which we did discuss at town meeting. And so the Affordable Housing Trust has already reviewed the deed and voted on it, which I'm sure Alan can speak to. And then so all that's left is for the board to make the motion and execute the deed. And then we would transfer the property, and it would be fully under the Affordable Housing Trust, the property as well as any improvements or personal property that's currently at that address.
So, yep, the Housing Trust voted to execute the deed that was prepared by town council. It's one of the simplest deeds I think I've ever seen in real estate. It just says, we get the property, town gets the money. Leah would facilitate the transfer, make sure we sign all the right paperwork to do that, and then it gets recorded with the Worcester Register of Deeds. The trust's plan thereafter is to assess the condition of the property and begin making arrangements for cleaning it out. There's some interesting challenges. There's an unregistered vehicle on the property which becomes ours, and how do we dispose of that or get rid of it? Is there any income that can be generated from the contents? We're not sure. Given the content, we'd make sure the building was properly secured, and we're making arrangements for periodic landscape treatment so that it's not overgrown and unsightly for the neighbors. The trust has already reached out to Massachusetts Housing Partnership for guidance in the process. There's a decision to be made whether it's a rehab or a rebuild. It'll be whatever's most cost effective. And at that point, there'd be an RFP that goes out to bid. The hope is that the work would begin next spring, and that the unit would be ready for occupancy later next year, if at all possible. We want to move as quickly as possible to get this back as a productive household for the town and for affordable housing.
great. Do you want to make a motion?
Sure. I move pursuant to the vote taken under Article 22 of the March 19, 2022 Annual Town Meeting to convey the parcel of land with improvements and personal property thereon located at 3 Baylor Avenue to the Westboro Affordable Housing Trust for consideration of $48,000 for affordable housing purposes, and to execute and to authorize the town manager to execute on behalf of the select board any and all deeds, affidavits, and other documents necessary or appropriate to effectuate said conveyance.
Second that?
Moved, seconded. Any questions or comments?
One comment and a question. I'll go with the question first. You mentioned possible, if it wasn't a rehab, possibly a complete rebuild. Is there any potential that that would not be a single family based on the lot? I'm just not familiar with the property.
Based on the lot and the scope of our funding for this, we expect it would stay same footprint.
Yep.
Doing anything else would require special permit, friendly 40B, things of that nature.
Sure.
We also want to be, one of our guiding principles for the trust is maintaining the character of the neighborhood.
Yep.
And so given how small the property is, I expect it would be identical number of bedrooms and baths.
Consistent.
And same foundation outline.
Great. And my comment is really just to thank, I know what this small committee has done. I can't imagine the work, and I'm so thankful for the work of the Affordable Housing Trust and all the work. So thank you to every member.
I will relay that. We've got a very good team.
Hey, all those in favor? 5-0, 5 being present. Thank you for that.
Awesome.
Okay, next on the agenda is updating personnel policies. Kim?
So this request seeks your, to amend our personnel policies. As you are aware, we have a public safety dispatch center that is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our full-time dispatchers are covered by a collective bargaining agreement. There are provisions in that agreement and times when there's a vacant shift. It is first offered to the full-time dispatchers. If it remains open, per the agreement, the chief has the right to offer the shift to our part-time or per diem dispatchers who kind of fill in as needed. Those individuals are covered under our personnel policies. Currently, our personnel policies have no provision for any additional or premium pay or those individuals to agree to work a holiday. The last collective bargaining agreement, the dispatchers changed some provisions around their holiday pay. Effectively, if a dispatcher is scheduled to work Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, Thanksgiving Day, or Christmas Day, and takes the day off, they forfeit their additional holiday pay, and that is either reallocated to a full-time dispatcher who picks up the shift, or in the event that it's covered by a per diem dispatcher, it would fund this request to pay them that time and a half. So the point there is it's budget neutral. It helps because it reduces, if nobody takes that shift, the chief has to force in one of the full-time dispatchers. So they're mandated to come in. Those are often holidays that if they're not scheduled to work and they're forced in, you can imagine what that might do for morale. So the idea here is it's budget neutral, the union is on board with this, and we hope it might incent some of the part-time dispatchers to pick up a holiday shift to help out.
Perfect. Makes sense.
Take motion?
Please.
I move to approve the amendments to the personnel policies as presented, effective July 1, 2022.
Second.
Christie, do I need, should we recuse on this, being it's a union?
No, it has no impact.
It's
Okay.
personal.
Perfect. Move second. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? It's 5-0, 5 being present. Thank you. Very, makes sense. Hopefully we get them to pick it up. Okay, next on the agenda, land grant application. Turn to Christie.
So this is, the board actually took this vote in executive session in connection with discussion around Zero Ruggles, but we just wanted to publicly acknowledge the vote for the town to submit the land grant application. While the town and the owner have not come to terms, and we continue to negotiate, we did have a deadline for submission of the land grant, which was July 14th. And so the board needed to take that vote in order for us to put forward that application. So the vote that was taken was to authorize the town manager to submit the land, which is the Local Acquisitions for Natural Diversity grant application on behalf of the town, and further to designate Conservation Director Sherry Wittes as a municipal project manager for the grant, thereby serving as the day-to-day contact for the project and representing the municipality in communication with the Commonwealth's Division of Conservation Services. So we just wanted to acknowledge that we have submitted the grant consistent with that vote. I also just really want to take the opportunity to thank Sherry Wittes. She spent a lot of time pulling the materials together. She worked really hard on getting that and meeting the deadline, and it was really a comprehensive application that she's really done a great job on.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. So there's no motion there. This is really just to make it, bring it out in public and acknowledge it. The vote that, as Christie said, the vote we took in executive session late in June. So any questions on that, or else someone move us forward? Great. Thank you. Okay, next, affordable housing related to the residences at Westboro Station.
Is she?
This one we're looking for
We're-
town
so
council.
yeah, so town council is actually going to speak to this agenda item, and so
Why don't you reach out to her? We'll
Yep, we've done that. So we can take up the next one.
Okay, so let's move to item 13, which is a request for appointments and reappointments. We have Sandra Pond, Conservation Area Wardens, Historical Commission, and Council on Aging. Let's go on Council on Aging, and Board Member Marshall wanted to speak on this one.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ian. So as the board knows, I'm working on the Senior Needs Assessment Task Force team, along with our Assistant Town Manager and a number of other folks, including members of the Council on Aging and the consultant. And this is a really important project for our town, and I'm very excited about it. I think adding new members to the Council on Aging represents an opportunity for maybe a member of this board. I'm certainly volunteering myself, and maybe our Assistant Town Manager, I don't want to volunteer her, but she's here, to have a conversation with the individuals who have generously stepped forward to raise their interest and or submit their interest for the Council on Aging, and to just get their thoughts on the senior needs assessment, answer any questions that they have, because the Council on Aging will be essential to the execution and delivery and kind of community outreach, part of that and promotion of. And I think it's important that as we bring on new members to the Council on Aging, that we, that they're aware of what, this undertaking. I plan in issues and correspondence just to provide an update to the senior needs assessment in the timeline. So I'll do that at a different point. But there will be sort of a crunch of work, and it's important work. So I think, the short of it is I would ask that we hold off on the appointments and allow myself and the Assistant Town Manager to have a conversation with the individuals who have asked to be appointed.
Just to make sure that they're comfortable and understand and
Yep,
the
exactly.
role that they'll be asked to play, whatever.
Yep. So.
Any concerns on that from the board at this time?
I'm certainly supportive of that idea. It is a big issue, big topic.
Okay, so we will table those appointments. Let's put them on the next agenda. Hopefully, if you could do that before the next meeting, that'd be great to move that forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, the next is a reappointment to the Historical Commission. These are commission appointments for 3 years. Is there a motion? Historical Commission.
We'll do that one first. Move to reappoint Phil Migdal to the Historical Commission for a term to expire June 30th, 2025.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? Okay, all those in favor? It's 5-0, 5 being present. Sorry, I'm going by the agenda, which is a little bit different than our package, so I understand where the confusion was. No. So the next is Sandra Pond Conservation Area Wardens, and this is 2 folks seeking reappointment, so I'd entertain a motion.
I'll move to reappoint Peter Bowman and Gary Moman as the Sandra Pond Conservation Area Warden for a term to expire June 30th, 2023.
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor? It's 5-0, 5 being present. Okay, so we're still waiting.
She's on.
Oh, she is?
Yep. We just can't see it.
Okay, let's go back to then the item 12, affordable housing residents at Westboro Station. And we do have Town Council Sharon Everett on the phone. Hello, Sharon. Okay, can we hear her? Sharon, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, a little soft, but yep, we can hear you. Okay, Christy, do you want to kick this off?
Yep. So as the board is aware, I had provided an update at a previous meeting about the affordable housing units at the residences at Westboro Station, and we've been working with Town Council, understanding that the Ardmore decision sets precedent for this case, and so the affordable housing requirement should stand. And so we have had some correspondence with Northland, and so Sharon is just going to speak to where we're at.
Perfect. Thank you, Sharon.
No, thank you for that we sent a letter to Northland, the Affordable Housing Trust, sent a letter to Northland. That the trust expects Northland to continue using the affordable housing units, continuing the affordability restrictions, notwithstanding the fact that the regulatory agreement is going to terminate on September 25th. The trust got a response back from Northland stating that their counsel had advised them that they did not need to comply with Ardmore. And as you know, we've had correspondence with DHCD because the unit is listed in the town's subsidized housing inventory. And I can tell you my conversation with their counsel was that they were very surprised to hear that Northland's response, that's something that they had never heard from any developer, any affordable housing restriction. And we reached out to DHCD to find out, what assistance they can provide in making sure that these affordable units stay affordable. And so the attorney that I spoke with at DHCD spoke with the chief counsel, and they had a meeting, and they've said that they will continue to support the town in whatever efforts they make to make sure that the affordable units stay affordable. They asked that we reach out to Northland to find out why Northland thinks that the Ardmore decision doesn't apply, because, as I said, DHCD's opinion is that it does. And DHCD asked that we keep them apprised of our efforts to pursue Northland. And we said that, if we don't get anything back, the town is considering what options it may have to ensure that Ardmore is followed. And then DHCD said that they were going to reach out to the Attorney General to find out what actions Attorney General would support the town in moving this forward. And they asked that we proceed on parallel tracks, that we undertake our efforts to make sure that the affordability continues, and that we might work with the Attorney General to see if they can intervene, as I said, to proceed on parallel tracks. So they asked us that we keep them apprised. They may not intervene, they think how it goes forward, but they fully supported the town in its efforts to make sure that the Ardmore decision is followed, because they don't see any rationale for it not applying. That's where we are with DHCD, and that's, I wanted to apprise you of our conversations with them.
Thank you.
So what are the next steps that we have?
So this was an update for the board, and then we actually also have this on our executive session agenda.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is approval of meeting minutes. So let's move into March 22nd meeting minutes.
I move we approve the minutes of the March 22nd, 2022 Westboro Select Board meeting as presented.
Second.
Okay, any updates, clarifications? All those in favor? It's 5-0, 5 being present. Moving forward, April 8th minutes.
I move we approve the meeting minutes of the Select Board meeting of April 8th, 2022 as presented.
Second.
Okay, moving second. Any comments or questions? This again was the board retreat. All those in favor? It's 5-0, 5 being present. Okay, May 4th minutes.
I move we approve the meeting minutes of the May 4th, 2022 Westboro Select Board meeting as presented.
Second.
Any comments or questions, clarifications? Okay, all those in favor? 5-0, 5 being present. May 10th minutes.
I'll do it. All right, I'll move to approve the May 10th, 2022 Select Board minutes.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. 5-0, 5 being present. No questions. May 24th. If there's questions, shut them out. I'm not even going to ask anymore. May 24th, is there a motion?
Motion to approve May 24th, 2022.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. All those in favor? 5-0, 5 being present. Thank you for all those minutes.
Thank you.
Sheila and Christy and Kim for some of the retreat ones as well, so appreciate it. Okay, town manager's report.
So the board did get my town manager report in your packet, and it being 7 pages long, I'm going to move through it really quickly. An update related to the town charter. In 2021, we did vote, or the town voted 2 amendments to the charter. One of them was to change Board of Selectmen to Select Board, and then the other was to incorporate the Facilities, Buildings, and Grounds Department into the Department of Public Works. On May 22nd, 2022, the governor signed the act to change Board of Selectmen to Select Board. So we've updated the charter, and that's available on the website. And we've reached out to Senator Eldridge's office because the other amendment is still in committee. So anything that we can provide there to move that forward. The plastic bag bylaw amendment. On July 6th, the town received a response from the Attorney General's office related to the approval of the amendments to the plastic bag bylaw. The Attorney General did approve it, except for the requirement to charge 10 cents per bag. So we have reached out to all of the businesses. We were very clear that it still required that approval, and we targeted a July 18th, so date of compliance. So as of yesterday, we were expecting that people were complying with the amendment, understanding that they don't need to require that 10 cent per bag charge. House Bill 4991 was a bill that extended the changes to open meeting law as a result of COVID, which allows us to meet, boards and committees to meet in a hybrid format as well as fully remote. So that bill was amended by the House to add a requirement for all public meetings to be held in a hybrid format effective April 1st, which would be very expensive and require a lot of technology as well as support from both Westboro TV and town staff. So we did submit a letter raising these concerns, and ultimately the bill passed without that amendment. So the state has extended the provisions of the open meeting law amendments to March 31st, 2023. So we can continue to meet in hybrid and virtual format until then. On June 22nd, the Votes Act was signed into law, which is election law reform. There's multiple changes. The town clerk is actually going to come to your next meeting to talk about those, and it's going to require some actions by the board. But they're related to mail-in voting and early voting and how that will move forward. The MBTA parking agreement, some of you were on the board in 2018 when we signed an agreement with the MBTA. The idea behind here was that we knew we needed additional parking spaces, and so we created this agreement where we would stripe parking spaces on Smithville Parkway, and the MBTA would create the mechanisms to make that pay for parking, and there would be a revenue sharing. There was a change in administration here, and we had new DPW director, new town manager, and so there were some concerns related to the implementation. And so as we were ironing out those concerns, COVID hit, and it sort of changed. No parking issues. It sort of changed the need for the additional parking. So we do know that people are parking in those spaces, but the lot is not full. The spaces are currently free because the implementation of the cost mechanisms was never implemented. So Chris Pan, our DPW director, and I did have a discussion with MBTA. They are interested in keeping the agreement in place. It's a 5-year agreement with some extensions, so it hasn't expired yet, but not implementing at this time because there is a cost to that implementation in terms of the pay for parking. And so, at this point, there was some suggestion that we could put up some signage and do some enforcement to sort of push people into the lot.
It's a cost to us, though.
It's a cost to us. So our recommendation is to just continue with the agreement, not terminate it, but at this point, not force implementation or do anything different. So the library project, we were awarded on July 7th, the $9.4 million library construction grant. Last week, I met with myself and the finance director, Leah Talbot, and Vice Chair Keogh, met with Maureen Amiot and Ed Baldwin, who's the chair of the Library Building Committee, to talk about funding mechanisms as it relates to our comprehensive fiscal management policy. As you might remember, we had this discussion when the fail school came up, because we do have within our policies a goal of the percentage of debt that we want to incur. And if anything over a certain threshold would create the discussion around a possible debt exclusion vote, even though we aren't legally required to do that. And so we had the discussion, and I think it was a good discussion, and that'll be a future agenda item for the board. And then just wanted to let the board know that Westboro Shell, who came before you in a hearing for a transfer of the wine and malt package store license at 27 East Main Street, actually withdrew their application from the ABCC, so we received that update. Department head updates. For Council on Aging, they have their summer programs, so they have sort of Tuesday night outs, which are really fun. They stay late open on Tuesdays, and they have run different programs. I'm going to pick out sort of big ones, and would encourage people to read this one. It's posted on the website. Department of Public Works, there's been an increase in costs to paving, so they're reassessing their paving plans going forward. Economic development, they're working on that business directory, which we've heard about, and as of the date that this was submitted, we had 110 businesses who were signing up. This is being funded through a grant. It's an exciting project that had came out of the local rapid recovery program. And the coop opened, which is exciting. The health department, you got most of your updates from our nurse, but also wanted to announce that certificates of merit for outstanding food handling was awarded to Nurse Farm and Harvey's Garden Center. And then just the reminder that the COVID-19 test kits are available in the health department, the senior center, the food pantry, and the library. Library grant I already mentioned. Police department, we talked about this at the ARPA meeting, but as of July 1st, Carly McKenna, our clinician, was assigned to the Westboro Police Department full-time. That's funded through a grant. We've had that grant for several years, but now it's a full-time for Westboro position, so it's exciting. We're also using recovery coach services, so where overdoses, once we respond to overdoses, they're logged into the critical incident management system, and then there's follow-up for referral services if they're interested. In the planning department, the special permit was granted for 153 Turnpike Road, which is dog obedience training and retail use, the Zoom room. There's a continued public hearing for 2529 Research Drive. The town has determined that we're able to commit a gross sewer flow of 100,000 gallons per day for that development that was proposed. That they've already come before you in site plan, so they're just finalizing with the planning board. They had a public hearing tonight as well. The site plan review was approved for the 155 Oak Street, which was the Spectrum Health Systems project that you heard about. And so some of the mitigation that you would had given comment to the planning board about included new sidewalks for the full length of the property, milling and overlaying the top course of the pavement in the street, and then new lights, which was a comment specifically that came from this board. And then there's an application for a multi-family housing project at 190-212 Oak Street. And then the Master Plan Implementation Committee, they voted to compose that of 2 members of the planning board, 1 member of the select board, and the town manager, and they're seeking 9 residents. So they're looking for letters of interest by August 17th from residents who are interested in being part of that committee. And then for the recreation department, we've received updates from the recreation director about Chauncey Beach. It continues to be swim at your own risk, but the gate is open 8 to 5 Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8 to 7 on Tuesday, and Friday 7:30 to noon. That's how we've been operating, and we haven't heard any negative feedback, so that's good.
Can you say those times again?
Sure. So it's 8 to 5 Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8 to 7 on Tuesday, and 7:30 to noon on Friday. So they just about follow the town hall hours, except it's 7 on Tuesday and not 8.
Thank you.
And then just, we have put out information that, that we're not treating Lake Chauncey because we are doing that study, but the Board of Health is testing the water weekly for bacteria. And then the town clerk's office is prepping for the elections, and as I mentioned, we'll come to you with a couple different requests for consideration leading up to the election.
Perfect, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, issues and correspondence to select board. Patrick.
I guess just on the note of Chauncey Beach, just drove by, I drive by there all the time, but this past weekend came back from a remote trip and came down the road, and it was great to see so many families enjoying, looked like there were a number of family reunions that might have been taking place on the beach. So it was great to see that. I'll just mention quickly that I attended the music trivia night on the library lawn last week. Fantastic event.
What'd you do?
Did you win?
Well, we held our own. The score at one point halfway through was like 115 was like the leader, and we were at 54. So we were like kind of in the middle of the pack.
Okay, that doesn't sound.
We were actually not bad.
The short answer is no. We did not win.
We didn't hear the final score, which is probably a good thing. But it was a great event, and I encourage all. They did a fantastic job with the categories and whatnot. And I guess that's really. Oh, I'll just mention also. Went to the Coop for dinner, and what a fantastic meal. I'll just mention large portions for those in the community that go there. Was able to share a nice meal between the two of us. So.
Great, Alan.
Just really briefly, just want to remind the community that Westboro Little League and Softball, the Little League 10U All-Stars are winding up their annual fundraiser for the Jimmy Fund. Our team historically has done very well in that fundraiser, which actually gives Westboro Little Leaguers an opportunity to go to Fenway and be on the field for pregame ceremonies and see the trophies and the rings and everything. So, in past years, I believe it'll happen this year as well, get a tour of Dana-Farber so they understand how the money they're raising is used. So if their Facebook site, the website has ways to donate and support that effort. That's all.
Great. Sean.
None tonight. Thank you.
Shelby.
Great, thank you very much. Just 2 items. Just want to remind folks of the farmers market. The new location is at B'nai Shalom, and the feedback has been great so far. The vendors rotate in terms of who's going to show up. Some are there weekly, but the list is published every week through Facebook, so folks can see who's coming. And last week, the Oscar Mayer Wiener truck made a guest appearance.
I heard they weren't serving hot dogs.
I know. That is true, but you could get a wiener whistle, which was free. So pick what you really want. So please don't quote that. Select Board Marshal talks about the wiener whistle. Okay. Anyway, moving on. As I mentioned earlier, the Senior Needs Assessment project has kicked off. Very excited to be working on that. And just some quick highlights. The survey will be informed by some focus groups and interviews with a whole variety of folks. The survey is expected to go out by mail in October, and the report will wrap up and be presented in March 2023. So lots of milestones in between there, and I certainly will have more to present as that process goes forward. But
Just a quick question for you on that, Shelby. Is it going to be just by mail, or will it be mail and an online?
It'll be available online.
yeah, it'll be available online too, and we're,
Thank you.
So we just had our first meeting, and so
Yeah.
happy to talk offline or, provide the board with more information as we move forward, so. And that's all.
Great.
Thanks.
I just had one quick thing, just to note and thank the high school students and parents and volunteers. The annual Appalachia Service Project trip, kind of co-sponsored by the Methodist Church and St. Luke's Catholic Church. We're down in McGoffin County, Kentucky, all last week, roughly 80 kind of participants there, but just really a great program that's been running for decades, and really a way for children here in Westboro, as well as those volunteers, just to go down and help others out. And I know it's a great experience for all them, but just thank them for that. They all made it down there safely, and they all made it back safely, which is the most important thing as well. So.
And did they go last year because of COVID?
They did not. So this is the first
Okay.
time they went, 2
years? Or?
Since 2019.
Wow.
Last year they did do projects, but they were all
Yep.
local
Yep.
in the area. So this was the first
That's great.
time since 2019 they actually traveled
Nice.
down to Appalachia. So that's all I have. So do we have a motion for executive session? Sure.
Just as, we can actually leave off, the,
Yes, I think I got it, yep.
but also 231 Turnpike Road.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Didn't have that. All right, thank you.
I didn't have that one either.
I move to enter into an executive session under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, Fire Chief Patrick Purcell, under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the following unions: clerical, DPW, patrol officers. Under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, with respect to litigation regarding residences of Westboro Station Northland, TPLP LLC at 100 Charles Meadow Drive, enforcement of affordable housing. Under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A6, to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real estate at 0 Ruggles. Under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A7, to act under the authority of the Select Board to approve executive session minutes of May 10th, 2022 and May 24th, 2022.
Can I just, so,
Did I skip something?
nope, so patrol officers shouldn't be in the motion. It wasn't posted, so we won't be talking about that. So just to
Okay.
be clear.
Let's remove the patrol officers.
Oh, it was in my other one, all right.
It was a trick. Okay, we're removing that. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, roll call vote.
Marshall, yes.
Actually,
Oh.
sorry, I have to declare that an open meeting would have a detrimental effect on the board's bargaining and negotiating position, and we will not be reconvening in open session at the conclusion of executive session. So, now a roll call vote.
Marshall, yes.
Keo, yes.
Johnson, yes.
Edinburgh, yes.
Welch, yes.
We are in executive session. Thank you again to Westboro TV, as always. Great job.